Chapter 51. Eisen's Arrangement. What do you think will come next? Harry asked softly, walking down the next corridor. We've passed Sprout's trap, the Devil's Net, and it must be Professor Flitwick who enchanted the keys, and Professor McGonagall, who transfigured the chess pieces and brought them to life, and only Quirrell and Snape's magic already. Hermione conjectured. Is Professor Eisen still here? Afterwards, Harry looked around again, but there was no sign of Eisen. He couldn't help asking. Of course, Professor Eisen just saved me. He said he would follow us. Ron rubbed his wrist vigorously, and then said excitedly. Ron was attacked by a chess piece earlier, although he was blocked by a shield turned into a card, but the impact still made his wrist very uncomfortable. While talking, several people have come to a door. Go in. The three looked at each other, and then Harry pushed the door open. After Eisen, who was secretly hiding his figure, followed in, he was almost suffocated to death by a stench. After hastily cast a head-bubbling spell on himself, only then did he have time to look at the level in front of him. A massive troll lay on the ground, probably dead. Obviously, this may be Professor Quirrell's method. As for Voldemort's help, Eisen didn't know. Great, now we don't have to fight trolls. Harry breathed a sigh of relief after seeing the scene before him. Hurry up, I can't breathe. Ron covered his nose with his sleeve and said something to Harry and Hermione, who were doing the same. The next door was quickly opened, and the scene behind caught their eyes. Unexpectedly, there was nothing strange waiting for them. There was only one table in the room, and 7 bottles of different shapes were arranged on the table. It must be Snape's potion. Upon seeing this scene, it was obvious that it was Snape's work, so Harry whispered. Then, the 3 of them walked in. Just after Eisen stepped into the threshold, 2 flames suddenly rose up. Among them, a black flame blocked the door leading to the front, while the door behind was sealed by a purple flame. Obviously, they were trapped between 2 walls of flames. Look, what's this? Hermione came to the table and picked up a roll of parchment from next to the bottle. In fact, Eisen is quite familiar with this scene. There were 7 bottles in all, but 3 of them were poison, 2 were wine, and 2 were potions. One of the bottles allows a person to pass through the black flames in front, and the other bottle allows a person to return safely through the purple flames behind. If Eisen remembers correctly, there were only Harry and Hermione at this level, and Hermione chose to go back, while Harry chose to go forward. So, with his help this time, Ron also came here. How would they choose? Since it is a level of logical reasoning, Hermione immediately played the role of a master. In just a few minutes, I got a bottle from the table. This little bottle can help us pass through the black flames and get the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione said happily. But there's only enough for 1 person in it. It's not even a sip. Harry looked at the bottle in Hermione's hand. There are 3 of us. This bottle will allow people to return safely. Then Hermione picked up another bottle. Then, the 3 of them looked at each other. True, one of the potions was only enough for 1 person to walk through the black flames, but that meant they had to face Snape alone. Of course, if the situation was a little worse, there might be Voldemort besides Snape. And there is also a potion that can bring a person back safely, which is obviously hinting at something. Professor Eisen? Why don't you stop Snape? Seeing that the 2 were silent, Ron called softly. In fact, Eisen still has some doubts about such a level. The question is how Quirrell got to the final level, the Mirror of Erist. It doesn't make much sense to say that Quirrell cracked all the levels. For example, the giant chessboard that Professor McGonagall changes. Could it be that Professor Quirrell restored all the chess pieces after winning the chess game? Of course, with Eisen's current level, he can reproduce both the level set by Professor McGonagall and the level set by Professor Flitwick. If he is allowed to break through the level, then he may use the magic spell to directly destroy the layout of the level, and then pass. But to let him pass without a sound and without disrupting the arrangement of the professors, he obviously still can't do it. So, how did Quirrell do it? Could it be that his magic level is so high? However, Quirrell's level may not be good, but Voldemort's level is not low. As the last big boss, someone who could be completely on par with Dumbledore, if Voldemort gave Quirrell advice, then he would indeed be able to do so. Thinking of this, Eisen showed a thoughtful look. Professor Eisen? Seeing that Eisen didn't speak, Hermione couldn't help calling out. Let me think about it. Eisen's voice sounded beside the 3. In fact, Eisen knew that the power of these 2 flames was actually not that great. At least, judging from the original book, the effect of those 2 bottles of medicine is to lower the body temperature. Whether it is inside or outside, it is all-round lowering, which can make people feel the bone-piercing feeling of ice. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa install the latest version. In this way, when they pass through the flame, they will offset the high temperature of the flame, allowing them to pass and return smoothly. Of course, the effect of the potion can also neutralize the destructive power of the fire. If he used the stopping spell, Eisen would be sure to extinguish the 2 flames directly. But Eisen wasn't concerned about whether he could break the 2 flames with the stopping curse, but about whether Hermione and Ron would follow Harry to face Voldemort. Although Eisen is confident that he can protect the three little wizards, there is no guarantee that Voldemort will use some evil black magic or strange curses, which will make Eisen hard to guard against. If Harry faced Voldemort alone, because of the powerful protective magic cast by his mother on him, there should be no problem in defeating Voldemort with the help of Eisen, but once an accident happens to Ron and Hermione, it may cause people to regret it. As consequence, Harry, go in. I will follow behind, don't worry. As for Hermione and Ron, you two can wait here, or you can choose to go back alone and find a way to notify Professor Dumbledore. After a moment of pondering, Eisen said directly up, Professor Eisen, Hermione yelled in surprise. Then, it's decided. Eisen's voice sounded again. Good luck, Harry, be careful. After hearing Eisen's arrangement, Ron blessed Harry. Although she already knew that Professor Eisen would protect Harry, Hermione still looked worried at Harry. Harry took a deep breath, took the small bottle from Hermione's hand, and drank the potion inside. Then he turned around to face the black flames, and rushed in. As Eisen expected earlier, without causing the slightest change, Harry passed through the door smoothly. The transfiguration technique was used silently, directly distorting the black flame blocking the door to open a passage, and then Eisen stepped over in an instant, and the flame behind him returned to its original state again. Because Eisen's casting speed is fast enough, in the eyes of Hermione and Ron, only after Harry passed through the black flame, the flame quickly opened a hole and then recovered from the middle like a curtain being drawn. As is, it's just a blink of an eye. If they didn't know that Eisen would follow, they might have thought it was an illusion. Chapter 52, Confronting Voldemort. Harry, who had just entered the last room, was already stunned when he saw everything in front of him. Because there was indeed someone in the room already, but it wasn't Snape or Voldemort as he'd always thought, but that stuttering Professor Quirrell. Eisen, who came in after him, naturally also saw Harry's bewildered expression. Obviously, Harry's guess was wrong from the beginning to the end. Harry was at a loss for a moment. It's me, Mr. Potter. Although Quirrell's face was pale at this time, he no longer had the soft and weak look of the past, and instead looked at Harry with a sneer. I was just wondering if I would meet you here. But, I thought it was Snape. That's right, he blamed Snape for everything, and Harry, who always thought that Snape was the big villain, suddenly realized that things were not what he thought, and he didn't know what to say for a while. Snape? Haha, yes, Snape really doesn't look like a good person. He flies around like a giant bat, which is very helpful to us. Quirrell laughed. His tone was extremely cold, the same as in the past. That vibrato was totally different. With him around, who would have doubted? Poor, stuttering odd, Professor Quirrell? But on the court, Snape tried to kill me once. He cast a curse on me. Harry couldn't believe the scene in front of him was real, and then told what he had experienced on the court. Should we take advantage of the time when the villain is talking too much, and directly attack Quirrell and let the other party rush to the street? Eisen thought as he stood quietly aside, but then dropped the idea. In fact, Eisen can do a lot of things. Just a polymorph can bind Quirrell, and a disarming spell can knock the opponent's wand away. But defeating Quirrell cleanly is not Eisen's current goal. His goal is to take the opportunity to get the Philosopher's Stone. Therefore, it would be more appropriate for Eisen to wait until Harry has the Philosopher's Stone in his hands. No. I was the one who tried to kill you. During that Quidditch match, your friend Miss Granger cast a spell on Snape, and the confusion caused knocked me over. Quirrell shook his head, coldly smiling coldly. She broke my gaze on you. That's why you escaped. Of course, if Snape hadn't been chanting a counter curse, you would have fallen to your death. Snape is going to save me. The words, spoken by Quirrell himself, made Harry's breath catch. The person who wants to kill himself suddenly becomes the person who wants to save his own life. This kind of contrast is really hard to believe. So, Snape, who has never been a referee before, wants to be the referee in the second match. Make sure I'm safe. Yes, he doesn't actually have to do that. I can't do anything with Professor Dumbledore around, but he does make a lot of people uncomfortable thinking he's preventing Gryffindor from winning. Too bad it's all a waste of time, and I'm going to kill it today, you. Quirrell sneered and snapped his fingers, and several ropes sprang out of nowhere to tie Harry up. Okay, wait quietly. I want to look at this interesting mirror. It is the key to find the Philosopher's Stone. Only Dumbledore can come up with such a thing. It seems that Harry is just a little wizard with no strength. So after Quirrell tied Harry up, he turned and fumbled around the mirror of Erased. I saw you and Snape in the Forbidden Forest. Harry tried desperately to break free from the ropes that bound him, but they became tighter and tighter. In order to prevent Quirrell from getting the Philosopher's Stone, Harry could only delay time with his mouth. Yes, he had already started to suspect me at that time. He thought he could stop me, but it was impossible. Quirrell said indifferently, as if disdainful, I have Voldemort as my backer. I see the Philosopher's Stone, and I'm presenting it to the Master, but where is it hidden? Quirrell said generally, staring at the mirror of Erased. But, Snape always seems to hate me so much. Harry was restrained and couldn't move, so he could only delay as long as possible. However, at this moment, he still turned his head and looked around. Eisen, who noticed Harry's little gesture, understood that he wanted to help him himself. However, Eisen knew that Harry couldn't get out of trouble directly at the moment. Otherwise, if Quirrell jumped the wall in a hurry, then Harry might face a greater crisis. So, it was just a spell cast by the cards Harry had hidden on him. "Oh, he does hate you," Quirrell said casually, and at this moment, Harry felt a warmth in his chest that quickly circulated throughout his body, calming down his brain a lot. Feeling the sensation in his chest, Harry knew that was where he hid the poker that Professor Eisen had given him. "He went to Hogwarts with your father, and they hated each other, but he didn't want you to die." Quirrell didn't see Harry's movement, but continued to stare at the mirror of Eriste. "What's the matter with this mirror? Where is the Philosopher's Stone hidden?" Quirrell cursed fiercely, stretching out his hand as if to smash the mirror of Eriste directly. "Use that, boy!" Harry looked at Quirrell in horror, and the hoarse voice came directly from Quirrell's body. "Okay, master." Quirrell turned to look at Harry, and with a clap of his hands, he untied the rope from Harry's body. "Come here, Harry. Look at this mirror. See what's in it and tell me." Perhaps it was because Eisen was hiding in the dark, so Harry didn't look too scared. "Go directly to the mirror of Eriste step by step." Harry walked up to the mirror of Eriste and looked through the mirror, because I kept thinking about how to get the Philosopher's Stone before Quirrell. So, he saw Harry in the mirror pull out a bright red stone from his pocket, wink at him before putting it back in his pocket. At this moment, Harry felt the weight of his pocket, and something had already fallen into his pocket. It's incredible that he got the Philosopher's Stone just like that. It wasn't just Harry. Eisen on the side had been staring at Harry's pocket, and after seeing a slight change in his pocket, he knew that Harry had taken the Philosopher's Stone into his hand. "Tell me, Harry, what did you see?" Quirrell grew impatient. "I saw I won the House Cup for Gryffindor, and Headmaster Dumbledore was shaking my hand." Obviously, Harry had to invent a lie to trick him. "Get out of the way." Quirrell pushed Harry back a few steps. But before Harry could take the opportunity to leave, the hoarse voice from Quirrell's body came out again. "He's lying?" Seeing this scene, Eisen had quietly held his wand in his hand, staring fixedly at Quirrell and Harry. Obviously, he has already planned to make a move. Because next, Dumbledore might be coming soon. "Let me talk to him, face to face." Voldemort's voice came again. Obviously, even though Voldemort still hadn't recovered, he didn't care about the little wizard Harry. "Harry Potter." Quirrell undid the scarf on his head and exposed the back of his head. To Harry's shock, there was a face on it. After this face turned to Harry, the hoarse voice came again. "Look at what I have become. I can only share a body with others. In the past few weeks, the blood of unicorns has made me gain some strength. Well, why don't you give me the Philosopher's Stone in your pocket?" Harry staggered back a few steps, suddenly felt a pain in the scar on his head, and his breathing became short of breath. "Don't be stupid. If you want to save your life, you can rely on me. Otherwise, you will end up with your parents, who begged me for mercy before they died." Quirrell kept walking backwards, the face on the back of his head keep approaching Harry. "You lied." Harry yelled out with a sudden surge of anger in his heart. "I killed your father first, and he fought me bravely. Your mother doesn't need to die, but she will try her best to protect you. Now, give me the Philosopher's Stone." "Forget it, Professor." Harry stepped back quickly, and then called for help. "Grab him." Under Voldemort's instruction, Quirrell turned around and held out his hand to Harry, but it was a pity that Harry had a protective spell cast by his mother with love and life, so Quirrell, who was possessed by Voldemort, couldn't touch him. To Harry, the moment Quirrell grabbed Harry's arm, he was magically wounded in the arm. Kacha kacha. At the same time, the masonry on the ground twisted and turned into several metal chains, which bound Quirrell's body and made him unable to move. At the same time, Eisen on the side lifted the illusion spell and revealed his figure. "The book chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years. Yegwo Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwo Yudu here." Immediately afterwards, a big golden clock was turned upside down on Eisen's body, and at the same time, the magic-marked cards on Harry's body changed and turned into a metal coat and draped over his body. All of this happened in the blink of an eye, so Quirrell didn't react at all. "Master, I'm trapped." Quirrell could not help screaming as the metal chain tightened. "You are a professor at Hogwarts. Who are you? How dare you go against me?" Hearing Harry's shout, Voldemort quickly guessed that Eisen was a professor at Hogwarts. However, since the Admiralty was holding Eisen, and the back of Quirrell's head was not facing Eisen, Voldemort didn't know who Eisen really was, nor what he looked like. Chapter 53. Immortality. Of course Eisen knew that the villain died because of talking too much, so when faced with Voldemort's questioning, Eisen didn't even have the thought of answering him. Seeing Quirrell staring at him painfully, as if to see his identity, Eisen directly stretched out his wand and hit him with a silent, shattering curse. Boom! Quirrell's body instantly turned into powder and completely dissipated. In fact, even if Quirrell saw him, he wouldn't be able to guess his identity, because his golden bell-style iron armor curse is too strong. Not to mention covering his whole body, it can even block a large part of his vision. In the eyes of outsiders, when Eisen casts the iron armor curse, he will only see a figure like a lake under a big golden bell. Therefore, Quirrell did not disclose Eisen's identity to Voldemort immediately. If Quirrell had his wand in hand and was prepared, then Eisen might have to pester him for a while if he wanted to finish him off. But unfortunately, Quirrell's attention was all on Harry at the beginning, so when he was tied up by Eisen's surprise attack, he had no ability to resist. At this moment, a shadow suddenly flashed where Quirrell disappeared, and disappeared into the eyes of Eisen and Harry through the black flame. Afterwards, Eisen's thoughts turned, and the iron armor curse on his body dissipated, and the metal coat on Harry's body also changed and returned to its original form. Professor Eisen, Voldemort wasn't killed? Harry was not too touched by the changes on his body, but looked at Eisen in shock and asked. Yes, Voldemort is not that easy to kill. Eisen knew that Harry saw that shadow too. Obviously, although Quirrell's body was destroyed, Voldemort's soul was not. By the way, Professor Eisen, this is the Philosopher's Stone. Harry took out a red stone from his pocket and handed it to Eisen. Eisen took the Philosopher's Stone with a curious look on his face. Is it possible to consume a miraculous feature to reenact the discovery of the extraordinary feature, the legendary feature of immortality? Discover the extraordinary characteristic, the perfect level Midas touch characteristic. Do you need to consume a miraculous characteristic to reproduce it? Contrary to Eisen's expectation, the Philosopher's Stone suddenly had two characteristics. One is the legendary level of immortality, and the other is the perfect level of Midas touch. However, after seeing that the property of immortality was really extracted by Goldfinger, Eisen couldn't help showing a smile on his face. It's really good. It's not in vain that he waited so long on purpose. Thinking this way in my heart, the action didn't stop, and my mind clicked on the option of immortality. Then, the Goldfinger character panel has undergone some changes. Character: Eisen Turner. Extraordinary talent: magic, activated. Magic value: 7,030, add 10 points of magic every day. Extraordinary characteristics: excellent level spellcasting characteristics, combination degree 115. Already fused, legendary level immortality characteristics, not fused. Miracle feature: 0 copies, 1 copy is automatically obtained every year. Obviously, the miracle feature on Goldfinger has forged the immortality feature and turned it into a supernatural feature. Without the slightest hesitation, Eisen directly focused his thoughts on the immortality property. Please choose whether to incorporate the immortality feature. A pop-up window appeared directly in front of Eisen. Although he was surprised that it was different from the fusion of spellcasting characteristics, he chose fusion without the slightest hesitation. Unexpectedly, just after Eisen made this choice, a magical power was directly born in Eisen's body, and then instantly fused to his whole body. Moreover, what followed was a kind of itching that went deep into the bone marrow. In an instant, Eisen's face became ferocious. But before he couldn't help shouting out, the itch subsided like a tide. Character: Eisen Turner. Extraordinary talent: magic, activated. Magic value: 7,030, add 10 points of magic every day. Extraordinary characteristics: excellent level spellcasting characteristics, combination degree 115. Already fused, legendary level immortality characteristics, already fused. Miracle feature: 0 copies, 1 copy is automatically obtained every year. Glancing at the Goldfinger, Eisen saw the immortality properties that had been perfectly integrated. With a thought, the character panel disappeared in front of his eyes. Put it away, and hand him over to Professor Dumbledore when the time comes. Eisen had achieved his goal in just a few seconds since Harry handed over the Philosopher's Stone. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years. Yegwa Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa here. Now that the goal has been achieved, Eisen will not have the idea of using the Philosopher's Stone again. You know, Eisen still understands the truth of being pregnant with a jade. Besides, this Philosopher's Stone was given to Dumbledore by Nico Flamel for safekeeping. Professor Eisen, I think it's better for you to keep it. Looking at the Philosopher's Stone handed back by Eisen, Harry didn't accept it, but suggested that Eisen keep it. While speaking, Harry let out a long breath. It can be seen that the experience just now made him a little confused. Before Eisen could do anything, a figure suddenly appeared beside the two of them out of thin air. Turning his head, he suddenly found that he was the famous Dumbledore. Eisen knew it when he saw the turkey on his shoulder. Obviously, he directly entered here through apparition with the help of Phoenix. In fact, the Hogwarts spell is so powerful that not even Dumbledore can apparate directly in the castle. Professor Dumbledore. Harry was taken aback, and then completely relaxed. Only then did he feel a little dizzy in his head. Professor Dumbledore, Harry got the Philosopher's Stone, and he successfully stopped Voldemort. Eisen handed the Philosopher's Stone in front of Dumbledore. Voldemort? Harry, are you okay? Hearing the name Voldemort, Dumbledore instantly became serious, and after taking the Philosopher's Stone handed to him by Eisen, he quickly came to Harry and asked Rode, "I'm fine." Before Harry could continue, he suddenly passed out, clutching the scar on his head. Dumbledore went up to check and found nothing serious, heaved a sigh of relief, then looked at Eisen. "Professor Eisen, Harry needs to be sent to Pomfrey to rest. I think you can tell me when you are free. Tell me what happened." "No problem, Professor Dumbledore." Obviously, this was to find out from him what happened. The next day, while Harry was still sleeping in the hospital, Eisen had told Dumbledore everything about his involvement in the headmaster's office. Not knowing how well Dumbledore knew what had happened to Harry, Eisen told them all, starting with the troll on Halloween last year. "Then, Professor Eisen, when you knew Harry and the others were going to stop Snape, why didn't you stop them?" Dumbledore was keenly aware of this doubt. Indeed, when a professor knows that students are going to take a risky night tour, and that they are going to a place strictly prohibited by the principal, and they are likely to face huge risks, the most important thing a professor should do is to dissuade them. However, facing Dumbledore's question, Eisen couldn't help but want to complain. "If I really stop them, will things really develop in the direction you want?" But on second thought, if Dumbledore could come back from London so quickly, maybe he could quietly get rid of Quirrell, who had been possessed by Voldemort without anyone knowing. In this way, Harry and others don't need to take risks. "Well, although I think I can protect them well, I really didn't think about it." After having that thought, Eisen had to admit his mistake. "Professor Eisen, you need to know that Voldemort is not completely dead. Maybe you lived in the Muggle world before and don't know how dangerous Voldemort is, but I think you need to find out." Dumbledore blinked, but didn't blame him too much. He, however, spoke the news very solemnly. "Of course, Professor Dumbledore, I have to say, I have the courage to face Voldemort." Eisen's eyes revealed an inexplicable look, and his tone was extremely confident. In fact, when Eisen said this, he really wanted to say that what he had was not courage but confidence. But he couldn't speak out about Goldfinger, so of course he could only show his courage to face evil. Chapter 54 afterwards. To be honest, Eisen had thought about whether he could take the opportunity to withdraw from Hogwarts now that he could live forever. But the previous shot against Quirrell, which defeated the opponent cleanly, although there is no reference, but Eisen is more confident in his own strength. In addition, after incorporating the immortality property of the Philosopher's Stone, his physical fitness has been greatly enhanced, reaching 4 times the level of ordinary people, which makes him even more confident. Moreover, as time goes by, his magic power will become more and more abundant and stronger. Since he can quickly become stronger, is it necessary to run away without doing anything? Obviously, Eisen still prefers to stay at Hogwarts. Besides, he was not directly exposed to Voldemort's eyes, so he could continue to be a passerby professor at Hogwarts. Of course, there is another very important reason. That is, staying at Hogwarts seems to have the opportunity to contact the Time Turner. "Yes, Professor Eisen, you are the most gifted wizard I have ever seen. To be honest, even he is not as good as you." Feeling the growing magical power in Eisen, Dumbledore has known what is called magic in this year. Shocked. A year ago, when Eisen first entered Hogwarts, the magic power in his body was at the level of an ordinary adult wizard. But now, it has far surpassed adult wizards. Dumbledore could even feel the magic in Eisen's body, and if he kept growing at that rate, he might be able to surpass him in a few years. At the beginning, Dumbledore was indeed a little wary of Eisen, a Muggle-born wizard, but after a year, judging from his performance in the astronomy class, he was indeed different from dark wizards. Therefore, Dumbledore was relieved a lot. "By the way, Professor Dumbledore, can you please keep it a secret and don't reveal my involvement in this matter?" However, although Eisen felt that he had the courage to face Voldemort directly, since he did not expose it, it would be inconvenient for everyone to we all know. "Voldemort didn't see me, so," seeing Dumbledore's suspicious eyes, Eisen quickly explained, and then showed a meaningful look. "So, you want to keep hiding in the dark?" Hearing what Eisen said, Dumbledore immediately looked clear, and there was a look of admiration in his eyes. Obviously, Dumbledore was very satisfied with Eisen's cautious attitude. "That's right," I thought, "so that I can surprise Voldemort at the right time." Eisen nodded. Obviously, as a passerby professor, Eisen felt that it was appropriate to continue to be a passerby. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, Yegwa Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa here. "Okay, so Harry and the others," Dumbledore nodded, but mentioned the trio again, with a hint of hesitation on his face. I'll tell them that it was Professor Dumbledore who saved Harry at the last minute. Eisen knew his hesitation, but he didn't have that much qualm about asking students to lie. Eisen had largely stopped worrying about his parentage since his in-depth conversation with Dumbledore. Obviously, although he created himself a wizard persona who is a Muggle research expert. For Dumbledore, after a year, he has already investigated Eisen's origin clearly. It's just that Dumbledore didn't talk about Eisen's identity that day, so naturally, Eisen didn't have to worry about his identity. When he is free, Eisen has time to feel the changes in himself. But it's a pity that since the fusion of the legendary immortality feature, Eisen has not felt any more changes except that his overall physical fitness has improved and his magic power in his body has been controlled more smoothly. As for whether life can be felt longer, Eisen said that he can't feel it at all. From this point of view, immortality can only be left for the future to be witnessed by time. But no matter what, Voldemort worked so hard to achieve the goal of immortality, but Eisen achieved it in this way, which is quite gratifying. When Eisen came to the hospital, he saw Ron and Hermione surrounded Harry. Harry had come to his senses and seemed to be in good spirits. It seemed that the pain in Harry's scar from being up close to Voldemort had completely subsided. Professor Eisen. Harry was telling the two about everything he had experienced, and after seeing Eisen come in, a happy expression appeared on his face. Harry, are you all right? Eisen nodded with a smile and asked with concern. Phew, nothing happened at all. Also, thank you, Professor, for saving me from Voldemort. Harry stretched to show that he was fine, and then thanked him. I'm a professor after all, so of course I have to protect you. Besides, if I'm not wrong, Quirrell shouldn't be able to touch you, so as long as you can catch him, you'll be fine. Eisen saw the situation that day. It was clear, and he knew exactly what was going on. Therefore, knowing that if Harry grabbed him directly, Quirrell would not be able to escape. Yes, Dumbledore already told me that it was my mother who put the protective spell on me, but I still have to thank the professor. Harry nodded. So the Philosopher's Stone is gone? Ron interjected. Yes, what Professor Dumbledore said. The Sorcerer's Stone has been destroyed. Seeing Ron's regretful expression, Harry shrugged his shoulders. And Nicole Flamel is dying too? Ron continued. That's what I said, but Professor Dumbledore said, to the sane, death is just a great adventure. Harry really wondered why Nico Flamel didn't want to live anymore, but it's a pity that for a wizard of his age, he really doesn't understand all this. I'd say he's a little crazy. Ron suddenly felt that Dumbledore, the great white wizard, was a little unreasonable. Regarding the conversation between several people, Eisen on the side laughed secretly. I never thought that. I would be immortal easily. By the way, do you think Dumbledore deliberately led you to do this? Then, Eisen suddenly changed the subject. He gave you your father's invisibility cloak, so you have the opportunity to find out about the Philosopher's Stone? Then this is too scary. Hermione couldn't help shivering. I mean, if it wasn't for Professor Eisen, Harry, you might really be killed. I don't think so. Harry shook his head, and then showed a thoughtful expression. Dumbledore must have known what we were going to do, but instead of stopping him, he taught us a lot of useful things. I mean, the training given to you gives you the right to face Voldemort directly. Eisen took Harry's words and said, That's right, that's it. Harry looked up at a few people, then nodded vigorously. Well, this is where Dumbledore is great. But, there are 2 days until the year-end banquet. Do you need to prepare? Speaking of the year-end banquet, Ron might be thinking of the food at the banquet and couldn't help swallowing. Oh, please. Mentioning the year-end banquet, Hermione on the side was immediately discouraged, as if losing all energy. What happened to Hermione? Harry wondered why Hermione looked like this. Ahem. I know this, because Slytherin won the House Cup, you missed the last Quidditch match, and the Gryffindor team didn't beat the Winkelluo team. Seeing this, Eisen winked at Harry. He blinked and made a funny face. Harry was suddenly embarrassed. Not only did he not participate in the last Quidditch match, but he and Neville jointly deducted 100 points. Ron next to him didn't change his expression at all, and Hermione couldn't help but rolled his eyes. Someone is coming to see you again. There was a faint sound of footsteps outside the door, and Eisen's attention was shifted immediately. He found that since his comprehensive physical fitness has improved to 4 times that of ordinary people, he has become much sharper. Just like now, although the 5 senses are not yet able to achieve the effect after applying the Super Sense spell, it has already made him feel the changes in himself. Who is it? Harry looked at the door suspiciously. Immediately afterwards, a tall figure came in sideways. That's right, it was Hagrid. Harry, I'm really sorry. It's all because of me, an idiot. I told that villain how to subdue Lu Wei. Hagrid covered his face and cried, I don't drink anymore. I should be punished and kicked out of Hogwarts. It was obvious that Hagrid was extremely annoyed and blamed himself. Chapter 55, Confession and Year-End Dinner. Hagrid, don't do that. Harry had never seen Hagrid show such an expression before. Seeing his trembling and remorseful expression, Harry couldn't help persuading Hagrid. He will always have a way to find out how to subdue Lu Wei, yes, I mean Voldemort, and even if you don't tell him, he'll find a way. You almost died. Hagrid was still sobbing, but he felt much better after being comforted by Harry. Right, don't worry anymore. Come on, eat a chocolate frog, I have a lot. Seeing this, Harry stuffed the chocolate frog into Hagrid's hand. Oh, by the way, you reminded me that I brought you a present. Hagrid managed to calm down and handed Harry a beautiful book. Harry accepted it suspiciously, and after turning a few pages, his eyes became moist. It was plastered with pictures of the wizard, and on every page there were fathers and mothers smiling at him and waving at him. I sent an owl to write to your parents' old classmates asking for these pictures. I know you don't have any of them, so, do you like it? Hagrid explained. Obviously, from Harry's expression, he liked this gift very much. By the way, let me tell you one thing. You must keep the fact that I defeated Quirrell a secret, and you must not let others know. After Hagrid left, Eisen hurriedly told the three of them. Secret? Hermione had a puzzled expression on her face, and then looked at Harry and Ron, who also looked at Eisen with the same puzzlement. That is to say, no one should know that I walked through the trapdoor with you, and no one should know that I saved Harry by defeating Quirrell. Eisen said the specific request. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years. Yegwo Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwo here. Why can't you say it? Ron was very puzzled. How could such a feat not be known? Voldemort is not dead. Dumbledore must have said that he will come back someday in the future. Seeing that the three showed signs of fear but still nodded, Eisen continued, but I was hiding my body at the time, and didn't let Voldemort see me clearly. So, he doesn't know my existence yet. That is to say, if it is revealed that the professor is acting together with us, then Voldemort will get the news, so he can make preparations in advance. After hearing Eisen's words, Harry thought of how he was enveloped by the golden bell before, and then suddenly exclaimed, That's right, so it was Professor Dumbledore who arrived at the critical moment and saved Harry's life. Eisen showed admiration to Harry. I have already discussed this with Professor Dumbledore, and he also agreed to do so. Okay, Professor, we will keep it a secret. After looking at each other, several people nodded in agreement with Eisen's proposal. Since Eisen had already told the trio something confidential, the version that the whole school was talking about the next day changed. It can be said that everyone knows how Harry, Ron, and Hermione ventured through the level. You see, Dumbledore was able to arrive at the last minute because of Harry's brave shot to block Quirrell. Of course, due to the relationship of confidentiality, Eisen's figure was naturally excluded from this matter. So, no one in the whole school except Dumbledore and the trio knew that Eisen had killed Voldemort in one move. Well, a possessed Voldemort is also considered Voldemort. However, there is such a thing as legitimacy in the wizarding world, and I don't know how well the trio's secrecy effect is. Forget it, one day can be kept secret. The year-end dinner finally came, and the auditorium was full of people that night, and Eisen also sat in the professor's seat early. The entire auditorium has undergone great changes compared to the past. Rows of green and silver decorations hung from the ceiling, which obviously represented Slytherin's decorations. Even the wall behind the guest of honor had a huge banner of the Slytherin on it. After all, judging from the points, Slytherin has won the Academy Cup again, and has won the Academy Cup for 7 consecutive years. So wizards at Slytherin House cheered and celebrated. In contrast, the wizards of the other 3 academies, although the atmosphere is relatively harmonious, is not as jubilant as Slytherin. Suddenly, Eisen noticed that Harry walked into the auditorium, and following Harry's footsteps, the little wizards suddenly fell silent, making the entire auditorium still. People wanted to see the brave Harry, and rushed to see the past. Afterwards, whispers continued to sound, and discussions filled the entire auditorium. Harry didn't expect that he would cause such a big stir, but he pretended to be calm, came to Ron and sat down. Fortunately, it didn't cause much confusion, because Dumbledore came to the auditorium immediately after. Well, it's another year, said Dumbledore cheerfully, his beard twitching constantly. Before you feast on these delicacies, I must ask everyone to listen to an old man's cliché. What a wonderful year. You little wizards must have a lot of stuff in their heads, and the next summer vacation is waiting for you, allowing you to digest the things in your heads and free up your brains. Dumbledore paused, then slowly glanced at the students of the 4 major colleges, and then continued, Now, we must hold the Academy Cup Awards ceremony. The details of the scores of each college are as follows. 4th place, Gryffindor, 332 points. 3rd place, Hufflepuff, 352 points. 2nd place, Ravencrow, 462 points. 1st place, Slytherin, 472 points. Thunderous cheers erupted from the Slytherin table when Dumbledore finished speaking about the scores of the houses. Even some young wizards were knocking on the table with wine glasses and plates to express their excitement. Yes, that's right, they've all performed very well, Dumbledore continued. However, a few recent events must also be taken into account. When Dumbledore finished speaking, Eisen already knew what he meant. Sure enough, not only the students of other colleges, but even the wizards of Slytherin also restrained their smiles. There are some last points to be assigned. Let me see, by the way. The first item, Mr. Ron Weasley. Dumbledore's voice came out and Ron, a little wizard, suddenly became shy. He won the most exciting game of chess at Hogwarts in many years. For this, I will reward Gryffindor with 50 points. As soon as Dumbledore finished speaking, cheers erupted from the Gryffindor table, almost overturning the whole hall. Even Percy, who has always been very disciplined, announced loudly to several prefects, "That's my brother, the youngest brother." He passed Professor McGonagall's giant chessboard array. The second item, Miss Hermione Granger. She faced the fire and calmly reasoned logically. I will add 50 points to a Gryffindor. When everyone calmed down a little, Dumbledore continued to announce an additional item, directly let the Gryffindors cheer again. Perhaps overjoyed, Eisen noticed that Hermione was lying on the dining table with her face buried in her arms. Maybe she cried, but it should be a kind of tears of joy. The third item, Mr. Harry Potter. He has shown extraordinary courage, for which I will reward Gryffindor with 60 points. When Dumbledore said these words, the entire auditorium instantly became silent. Stand up. Because of Eisen's interference, even though he had deducted 30 points from Gryffindor, he also deducted 50 points from Hermione. Therefore, when Dumbledore announced the third item, Gryffindor's score had reached 512 points, completely surpassing Slytherin. After reaching this conclusion, cheers roared in the auditorium. The wizards of Gryffindor, in particular, were almost hoarse. Eisen smiled and looked at everything in front of him, admiring Dumbledore's insane way of adding points. You thought it was over, but of course it wasn't. Then, as Eisen expected, Dumbledore also praised Neville's courage in front of everyone, and then added 10 points to him. This means that we need to make a small change to the decoration here. Because the cheers were too violent, Dumbledore had to impose a loud voice on himself, so that his voice could drown out the thunderous cheers. Then, Dumbledore clapped his hands, and the green hanging ribbons suddenly turned red, and the Slytherin disappeared, and a majestic Gryffindor lion appeared instead. After the year-end banquet, the final exam results of the little wizards were announced. As expected, Hermione won the first place in the whole class, and Harry and Ron also passed the exam with high marks. Presumably, part of it is due to Eisen's tactics. Chapter 56, The Magic Recorder. While the little wizards were packing their wardrobes and packing their luggage into suitcases, Hermione had already arrived at Eisen's office with a big suitcase. Hermione, what's the matter? Looking at the little girl in front of him, Eisen couldn't help but sighed. To be honest, after a year of getting along, Eisen found Hermione really likable. Professor Eisen, I'm here to return the suitcase. Hermione nodded, then pointed to the suitcase beside her. After seeing it, Eisen suddenly realized that this suitcase was exactly the one he had lent them to transport Norbert, and the traceless stretching spell had been cast inside it. But to be honest, Eisen is completely useless at the moment. Well, I don't need this suitcase anymore, so I'll give it to you. Eisen pondered for a moment and really felt that it was useless. But Hermione stretched out her right hand, looked at the finger with the ring. Her face flushed suddenly. She thought of something and wanted to refuse. Don't rush to refuse. Eisen interrupted Hermione. So, haven't you already agreed to join my magic film company? Since you are already my employee, then this will be handed over as the company's office supplies. It has been used by you for a long time. Is this okay? Hermione looked at Eisen suspiciously, wondering if he was making an excuse on purpose. Of course, and if you have a pet, you can put it in it, which is very suitable. Eisen nodded, with the expression that should have been. In fact, Eisen really didn't have much idea about what to do with the suitcase. After all, he was no longer needed, so he simply left it to Hermione. After Hermione left, Eisen found that someone came to his office to look for him. Fred, George, what are you? Seeing the twin brothers knocking on the door, Eisen was stunned for a moment, not knowing what they were looking for. Professor Eisen. Look. The two looked nervous, first closed the door tightly, then took out something and put it on the table in front of Eisen, looking at Eisen expectantly like a treasure. Wow, did you make it? Eisen was taken aback when he saw what the two of them had brought out, and then asked in an amazed tone. That's right, what was placed in front of Eisen was a tape recorder. Judging from the appearance alone, it is no different from the ordinary tape recorders in the Muggle world, but being able to put on such a posture by them shows that they should have been changed into magic props. That's right, this idea is very good. We've done a few pranks, and the effect is pretty good, Fred said, and George looked at each other, with weird smiles on their faces at the same time. So, this tape recorder can be used now? Eisen looked at the two, then reached out and took the magic tape recorder in his hand. That's right, just press the play button. Fred nodded. Since the previous miraculous properties had already been used on the Philosopher's Stone, Goldfinger, didn't have the slightest reaction when he got the magic recorder without the miraculous properties. Afterwards, Eisen solemnly pressed the play button on the magic tape recorder, and he regretted it in an instant. Cluck, cluck. The loud and clear rooster crowing sounded in Eisen's office in an instant, and the sharp sound directly made Eisen frown. Such a decibel noise is like beating gongs and drums in the ear, which is unbearable. Kami. Is this their prank? Seeing the faces of the two holding back their laughter, how could Eisen not understand what was going on? Afterwards, Eisen directly pressed the off button, but what he didn't expect was that no matter how Eisen pressed it, the button was normal, but the chicken crowing just didn't stop. I'll wipe it, this is too insane. I can't even turn it off. Eisen complained inwardly, wanting to slap the two brothers directly. When he saw that the two of them didn't feel uncomfortable because of the voice, Eisen knew that they had already made preparations in advance. Close it quickly. Eisen couldn't help throwing the magic tape recorder in Fred's hand. Well, Professor Eisen, you can't close it like this, you should do this. George snatched the magic tape recorder from Fred, and then said something to Eisen. Then, while Eisen was stunned, George clenched his fist and punched the magic tape recorder forcefully. Then, the magic tape recorder fell completely silent. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, Yegwa Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa here. I go. What kind of brain circuit is this? Eisen was completely convinced in an instant. It has to be said that the prank talents of the two are too strong. Next, the two introduced to Eisen how to delete the voices already recorded in the magic recorder and how to record new voices and so on. Okay, it's okay. You guys go home quickly. After everything was clarified, Eisen saw that the two were still laughing, put away the magic tape recorder, and drove the two out of the room. Out of the office. If we continue to toss, the office must be demolished. Fred and George stood outside the door and looked at each other. They didn't expect Eisen to be such a person. However, the two were so lively that they forgot everything in a blink of an eye. George, what do you think we'll make another one and give it to Percy as a present? It's so cool, I really can't wait. In a blink of an eye, the two began to discuss how to use the magic tape recorder to play tricks on Percy. Summer vacation is a rare time of rest for Hogwarts students, but for Eisen, it is also an opportunity to do business. For example, find relevant personnel to find out how to open a magic film company in Diagon Alley. Of course, Eisen wouldn't ask Dumbledore directly. After all, such a trivial matter is not enough to trouble others. Regarding this point, Eisen has actually already thought about it, and that is to ask Ron's father, Arthur Weiss. Because Eisen knew very well that the other party worked in the Ministry of Magic's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Department, so this matter should be very clear. So, when the little wizards boarded the Hogwarts Express, Eisen had already sat beside the trio. Professor Eisen, are you going home? Looking at the gentle Eisen, Hermione couldn't help asking. Oh no, I have something to talk to Ron's father about. Eisen smiled at Hermione, then gestured in Ron's direction. Wow, I welcome Professor Eisen to my house as a guest. I think my family will be very happy. Hearing what Eisen said, Ron immediately expressed his attitude happily, and then seemed to remember something, and directly sent an invitation to Harry. By the way, there is also Harry. You must come to our house to play this summer vacation, and I will invite you by taking pictures of owls. When the train passed through villages and towns, platform 9 3/4 of King's Cross had arrived. In order not to look so strange, the little wizards took off their wizard robes and put on jackets. Of course, even if the train stops on the platform, the little wizards can't rush up and walk out from platform 9 3/4, but only 2 or 3 people can pass each time. There is no way. If there are too many people, I am afraid they will be seen by ordinary people and cause big trouble. Hermione, goodbye. I wish you a happy holiday. After passing through the exit, Eisen waved to Hermione. Thank you, Professor Eisen, and you too? Hermione's eyes lit up when she heard Eisen's blessing. She waved to Eisen and turned to leave. Goodbye, Harry. Afterwards, Eisen greeted Harry. He's there. Look, Mom. Eisen's expression froze when a slightly childish scream came. Turning his head to look over, he realized that the screaming person turned out to be Ron's sister, Ginny. Harry Potter. I saw him, Mom. A little girl stared at Harry and immediately looked at Harry a little embarrassed. Standing next to her is her mother, Molly Weiss. Ahem then, Professor Eisen, goodbye. Harry's face became embarrassed, but he waved to Eisen anyway. Don't shout, Ginny. It's very impolite to point fingers at others. Mrs. Weasley reprimanded Ginny, and then looked at Ron and Harry with a smile. This year must be very busy. Very busy. Harry remembered everything he had experienced at school, and couldn't help but nodded. Also, thank you for the gift you gave me, Mrs. Weasley. Oh dear, that's nothing. I said, are you ready? As soon as the voice sounded, Eisen couldn't help frowning. That's right, it was Harry's Uncle Vernon, followed by two people, presumably Harry's Aunt Petunia and Cousin Dudley. "You must be Harry's family," Mrs. Weasley said, and when she wanted to say something, she was directly interrupted by the other party. "It can also be said, let's go boy, we don't have time to delay for a whole day." Vernon said so, turned around and left. Harry shrugged and had no choice but to follow along. Chapter 57. A Visit to the Weasleys. "Hello, you are." Perhaps seeing that Eisen hadn't left yet, Mrs. Weasley looked at Eisen with a smile on her face. To be honest, the attitude of the other party is really comfortable. "Mom, this is Professor Eisen from the school. He's going to visit our house during the summer vacation." Ron was surprised by Harry's family's attitude towards him, and when he heard her say that, he introduced him first. "Oh, very welcome. I think this must be a happy holiday." After learning about Eisen's identity, the smile on Mrs. Weasley's face became wider. "Thank you. I have something I want to talk to Mr. Weiss." Eisen responded with a natural smile to Mrs. Weiss's smile. "Let's go, hey, Ginny. What are you still looking at?" Mrs. Weasley nodded, but saw Ginny on the side looking into the distance, with a silly expression on her face, not knowing what she was thinking. "I didn't see anything. Let's go." Ginny blushed and grabbed Molly by the hand. Ron's home address is near the south end of the village of Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon, hidden among hills and trees. Surrounded by mountains and water, woods and grasslands, the environment is extremely beautiful. Ron's home is not known to Muggles because of the enchantment. However, when Eisen followed Weasley's family to the destination, he found that Ron's house was indeed a little different from ordinary houses. As described in the original book, it seemed to be built by magic, crooked to the height of several floors. There is a sign in front of the house that says, "The Burrow." Well, from the outside, it is indeed simple enough. Of course, after entering the Burrow, you will find that among wizard families, the most conspicuous shadows of family magic can be seen everywhere. Whether it is a broom that cleans automatically, or a kitchen that cooks automatically, it will give people a sense of wonder. When Eisen first saw the situation, the first thought that popped into his mind was convenience. How to say? Magic has indeed penetrated into every aspect of a wizard's life, and the degree of convenience is far beyond the imagination of Muggles. But would Muggles never be able to do this? Can technology really do it? Obviously, Eisen holds a negative attitude. In the previous life, as far as Eisen knew, smart sweeping robots, smart kitchens, etc., although not popularized in ordinary families, have already been realized. If technology develops for decades, then there may not be a scene where ordinary people are completely liberated. So Eisen marvels at the thought that technology can do what domestic magic can do. That's right, as far as it is concerned, magical abilities can do things far beyond the imagination of Muggles because they are too idealistic. But if technology develops to the level of sci-fi movies, the convenience of technology may not be comparable to magic. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, Yegwa Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa here. This point, for the immortal Eisen, can be verified in the future. However, when it comes to Ron's home, apart from household magic, the most eye-catching thing is some Muggle items. Or rather, Muggle items that have been dismantled and magically reassembled. Obviously, it's the work of Arthur Weiss. As a staff member of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Department, Mr. Weasley is quite different in the wizarding world, and he is very obsessed with the objects of the Muggle world. He even converted his own car into a magic car. It can not only drive on the road, but also fly in the sky. Of course, in order to avoid being seen by Muggles, it also has the function of invisibility. Although his vehicle is very dilapidated, it has to be said that the combination of technology and magic will produce a different charm. "Professor Eisen, please sit down first. I'll go get something to eat." After entering the burrow, Mrs. Weasley said kindly to Eisen, then turned to look at Ron. "Ron, don't be like your too big brother. Just be quiet at home, understand?" Regardless of Ron's bewildered expression, Mrs. Weasley wrapped a printed apron around her body and waved her wand at some fresh ingredients. "Ron, are you going to write to invite Harry to your house?" Eisen looked at Ron and chatted with him on a random topic. "Oh, yes, I have to write a letter to Harry." Hearing Eisen's words, Ron came to his senses and thought of what he had to do. "Wow, that's really cool. Yes, I think Harry will be very happy." After Percy came back, he locked himself in the room early, not knowing what he was doing, but Fred and George, who had been talking furtively, came to the room with a smile after hearing Ron's plan. Ron sighed. "I saw that you have a lot of Muggle items in your house," Eisen said thoughtfully after looking around for a week. "Yes, Dad is obsessed with everything related to Muggles. Our house is full of Muggle things." Hearing Eisen say this, Fred suddenly laughed. "Yes, if he comes here to search, he has to arrest himself." George on the side couldn't help but smirked. He's from the Ministry of Magic's Department of Prohibiting the Misuse of Muggle Items, but he himself has been abusing Muggle items." Ron, who got the quill in the note, explained to Eisen. Yes, Mom is going crazy about this, Fred said, and George looked at each other and then couldn't help laughing. Eisen nodded thoughtfully. No wonder the twin brothers Wesley's prank talent is in the production of magic props. In fact, this can be regarded as subtle. Hey Errol, take this letter to Harry. In a few minutes, Ron had written the letter. Then he slipped the note to the owl and gave a command. The owl named Errol looked very old, but he had no regrets in delivering messages and flew away in the air. After tasting the breakfast made by Mrs. Wesley, Arthur Wesley came back after a short wait. Since the purpose of Eisen's visit to Wes's house this time was to talk to him about something, he immediately told him about his plan to open a magic film company in Diagon Alley. Wow, Professor Eisen, I have to say that your idea is great. After hearing the reason for Eisen's visit, Mr. Wesley, who was obsessed with muggles, suddenly became excited. That's right, at that time. Maybe some muggle movies can be played for wizards to watch. Eisen nodded and revealed his plan. Is that so? Maybe it will be very attractive, Arthur said, with a wider smile on his face, as if he had seen the grand occasion after the company's opening. Yes, although I am a professor at Hogwarts, I am a muggle-born wizard. So it is not a bad thing for wizards to learn more about muggles, right? Obviously, Eisen gave the reason is very valid. Of course, this is really great. Seeing Eisen's attitude towards muggles, Arthur agreed very much. Strange to say, although the Wesley family is also a pure-blood wizarding family in the wizarding world, they don't care much about blood, unlike other pure-blood wizarding families that reject and look down on muggles. Eisen speculated that this might have a lot to do with Arthur's obsession with muggle items. Of course, because of this, the Weasley family is very unpopular with other pure-blood wizard families in the wizarding world. Chapter 58 Cooperation Plan. So, I have an immature idea. I plan to cooperate with Mr. Wesley to manage this magic film company. It can be seen that Arthur is very interested in Eisen's plan, so he took the opportunity to propose a cooperation require. Oh, you can just call me Arthur, but what is the cooperation you said? Hearing Eisen said that he wanted to cooperate, Arthur didn't quite understand what was going on. Well, Arthur, I think so. Eisen nodded and said the way of cooperation. You are very experienced in dealing with muggle-related incidents, and you know enough about the wizarding world to know what kind of things can attract them. And I happen to have some money, so we can partner to run this magical film company. Well, I plan to take out 200 galleons first to set up the magic film company, and I will trouble you for the rest of the work. The rest of the work? Arthur still didn't quite understand. After all, starting a movie company doesn't seem like much work. For example, the equipment for film projection, in the muggle world, a film needs to be produced, played, etc., which is very complicated. But for wizards, some magic can solve it, but the projection equipment still needs to be transformed, yes. Eisen nodded and explained a little. From Eisen's point of view, magically transforming muggle film projection equipment happened to be Arthur's forte. As for filming, Eisen feels that it can be solved directly with magic. After all, there are even magic radios and magic cameras in the wizarding world, and how to make movies can still be solved. As for Eisen taking out 200 galleons, it doesn't seem like much, but it is enough for a shell film company. Besides, if it's not enough, it's a big deal to go to Gringotts and exchange some pounds. Cinema equipment to transform the muggle world? Arthur's spirits rose at the mention. That's right, of course, don't worry. You can first understand how the film companies in the muggle world work, what equipment is needed, and then make preparations. Perhaps, some equipment can be directly replaced by magic. Eisen nodded and then made a suggestion. It seems that I will be busy in the next period of time. Obviously, Arthur was persuaded by Eisen. Then, for the 200 galleons, how about entrusting you to rent a shop in Diagon Alley as the company's residence? Then, Eisen handed a bag containing 200 galleons to Arthur. Isn't it enough to rent a store? If you want to buy a store, 200 galleons is obviously not enough. But if you just rent it, it should be more than enough. It can be rented for a few more years. Eisen shrugged. Then, after some discussions, the two reached a consensus. The upcoming Eisen Film Company hired Arthur as the head of the company to handle everything in the company. The condition Eisen gave was that 40% of the film company's profits would be given to him as a dividend in the future. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. At first, Arthur wanted to refuse such a condition, but with Eisen's insistence, he finally agreed. As for Arthur also serving as the head of the office of the Ministry of Magic's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Division, there is actually no conflict at all. After all, Eisen Films is just an empty shell, and even if it needs to be filled with details, Arthur can take it easy after get-off work. If Eisen is not in the world of wizards, but lives in a purely urban world, then starting a film company will definitely not directly give up 40% of the profits, but since he is a wizard, then don't worry too much about it. At first glance, Eisen's approach is a bit unethical, and he directly tricks people to handle all the company's affairs for Eisen. But Eisen gave the other party nearly half of the dividends, which is justified. Professor Eisen, Dad, you have reached a cooperation now? Ron exclaimed in astonishment after watching Arthur receive 200 galleons from Eisen. On the other hand, Fred and George, beside them, showed great interest. Oh, thank you so much, Professor Eisen. It was foreseeable that this family with relatively difficult conditions would have an extra income, so Mrs. Weasley eagerly stepped forward and hugged Eisen. You're too polite, Mrs. Weasley. Embarrassed by Molly's actions, Eisen had to look at Arthur and change the subject. Arthur, I have a film company in the Muggle world. You say, can I make a movie of what happened in the Wizarding world and show it to Muggles? Show Muggles what's happening in the Wizarding world? Before Arthur could speak, Ron, who was beside him, spoke in surprise. Eisen noticed that not only Fred and George next to him were attracted by this topic, but even Ginny, who was passing by downstairs, slowed down her pace. But that would violate the Wizarding Secrecy Act, wouldn't it? Fred looked at Arthur, then at Molly, then at Eisen with a shrug. Fred is right. Eisen, you may have some problems with your thinking. Obviously, although Mr. Weasley likes Muggles, he also knows the Wizard Secrecy Act very well. However, for Muggles, a movie is a story, and a story can be fake. Eisen explained from another angle, and then asked a question. Do you know the superhero movies in the Muggle world? Superman? Superman? What's that? George had an interested look on his face, and the others looked at Eisen curiously. Well, Superman is a movie in the Muggle world. It tells the story of a superhero who punishes crimes. You can also hear from any corner of the earth. You can even fly faster than the speed of light. You can drag planets. You can blow out stars with one breath, etc. Eisen briefly talked about what happened to Superman. But after Eisen finished speaking, he found that the Weasley family had completely fallen into a sluggish state. Is there such a person in the Muggle world who can drag the planet? After a while, Ron came back to his senses and looked at Eisen with a shocked expression. It's much better than a wizard. Arthur knew what the movie was about, but he was also amazed by Superman's strength. It's unbelievable. You can become so strong in the sun. Much stronger than Dumbledore. This is the exclamation of Fred and George. Eisen saw that even Ginny was staring at him. Ahem, this is a movie, a story, okay? In other words, superheroes like Superman are fake to Muggles. Eisen quickly explained. You mean, if the story of the Wizarding world is made into a movie for Muggles to watch, Muggles will also regard it as a story. They won't think magic is real? At this time, Arthur thoughtfully said to himself the opinion of, that's right, that's what I mean. Eisen nodded. After all, no one would take the magic played in the movie seriously. In this case, I don't think there is any problem, but the Ministry of Magic may not agree. You have to know, there are a bunch of old-fashioned old men there, and their ideas are too stubborn. Arthur showed a very interested look, but then said some concerns. Okay, then I have to think carefully about it. Eisen shrugged. Although he said so, he had already made a decision in his heart, and planned to find a suitable time to make a movie of what happened in the Wizarding world and broadcast it in the Muggle world. Chapter 59 Fusion Observation Features. It was evening when Eisen left West to come home. Although for Eisen, there is no restriction that he cannot use magic outside of school, but he still does not cast spells at will in the Muggle world, so as not to cause riots. Previously, Eisen thought about withdrawing from Hogwarts, but because he was not exposed to Voldemort, and because he had confidence in his own strength, he chose to stay at Hogwarts. Of course, the main reason is that Eisen still has an idea, which is to see if the time travel feature can be reproduced from the time converter. If such a feature can be obtained, it means that Eisen can travel in time. Of course, even if it was possible to do so, Eisen would try his best to be cautious. As for the reason, of course it is because the time in this world is too fragile. In most of the novels Eisen read in his previous life, only the extremely strong can travel through time, but there is no way to change history. Only individual novels with special settings can change history. But in the world he is in now, if he goes back to the past, no matter whether he is intentional or not, as long as he is a little careless and does something out of line, time will be disturbed and major changes will be caused. Not only will it cause people who were originally born not to be born, but it will also completely change history. The scariest thing is, if Eisen goes back to the past and destroys himself, maybe he himself will be completely wiped out. Therefore, time travel in this world is not a pleasant journey. Of course, although time travel is dangerous, Eisen is not willing to let go of the opportunity to obtain this method. If memory serves me correctly, the time turners were all destroyed in the end. In other words, if Eisen wants to get access to the time turner, he has to find a way from Hermione. It's just that Eisen has a headache when he thinks of his gold finger. Because he has come into contact with several good supernatural characteristics, but the miraculous characteristics are always not enough. Currently, the characteristics he has integrated are spellcasting characteristics and immortality characteristics, as well as flight characteristics, storage space characteristics, beyond the horizon characteristics, and observation characteristics that can be reproduced and fused. He intends to use his next miraculous feature on the occasional observation mirror, but the next few features, I'm afraid there will be some waiting. In the evening, Eisen checked into a hotel. Yes, he didn't live in the leaky cauldron, but in a muggle hotel. Eisen felt like a dream when he used the British pound again. Of course, although he was familiar with everything in the muggle world, but because there was no wireless or mobile phone, he didn't have much interest and fell asleep early. The next day, Eisen went to the Eisen Film and Television Company registered in London and found that under Jeff's management, although the company did not make much money, it was on the right track. Previously, the script outlined This Man from Earth, sent by Eisen to the company, has also been officially made into a movie and released. Yes, who made this script simple enough? The story of this movie happened in one room, and it didn't take much effort to shoot it, so it was completely done in just a few months. As for how much money he made, that was not something Eisen worried about. Time flies, and the day of July 4th comes in a blink of an eye. As he expected, Goldfinger gained another miraculous property after a year. As previously planned, Eisen directly reproduced and integrated the perfect level observation characteristics on the observation mirror into the eye part. Before merging, though, Eisen also took out the magic tape recorder commissioned by Fred and George to try it out. But the results surprised Eisen. The modified magic tape recorder actually showed two extraordinary characteristics. One is excellent level recording sound characteristics, and the other is ordinary level sound performance characteristics. This result surprised Eisen, because this means that after the magic tape recorder records the screams of straw, the sound performance characteristics of the ordinary level may become excellent level, or even perfect level. As for why the voice recorded by the magic recorder can also contribute extraordinary characteristics, Eisen guessed that it should be similar to the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone itself can make the elixir of life, but it was directly reproduced by Goldfinger. And the magic recorder can play a certain sound, so the characteristics of a certain sound can be directly reproduced by Goldfinger. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, change sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. Knowing that the magic recorder can really record the sound properties of Mandela grass, Eisen hesitated again. Because this kind of attack is indiscriminate and does not distinguish between the enemy and the enemy, it seems that you have to plug your ears when attacking the enemy, otherwise it may become suicide. As for the magic tape recorder that recorded the rooster's crowing sound, Eisen did not intend to delete its sound directly, because his sudden cock crowing happened to have a restraining effect on the basilisk, so Eisen put it away. As for recording Mandela sounds, at worst, Eisen will make a tape recorder himself. Now, Eisen's character panel looks like this. Character: Eisen Turner. Extraordinary talent: magic, activated. Magic value: 7,310, add 10 points of magic every day. Extraordinary characteristics: excellent level spellcasting characteristics, fit degree 115. Already fused. Legendary level immortality characteristics, already fused. Perfect level observation characteristics, already fused. Miracle feature: 0 copies, 1 copy is automatically obtained every year. However, after incorporating the observed characteristics, the effect is slightly different from what Eisen expected. After this perfect level observation feature is integrated into the eyes, it seems to have become an active skill. As Eisen's mind turns, he can control whether to observe at any time. Once he decides to observe, it is as if a high-definition panoramic map is stuffed into his mind, and he can see everything within a 5-mile radius. Obviously, when using the observation mirror, the mirror surface will display the situation within 5 miles, and then when it is necessary to observe a specific point, the mirror surface will display and project the situation of the specific point. But after merging the features, Eisen seems to have everything within 5 miles in his mind, and Eisen can observe any place at will. When Eisen saw all the situations within a 5-mile radius in his mind, whether it was high-rise buildings or the flow of people on the street, he was taken aback when all of these were perceived, thinking that he would be overwhelmed by the huge amount of information. But unexpectedly, everything was reflected in Eisen's mind like lines on the palm of his hand, without any effort. Seems to take all the information with ease. With a thought, the god's perspective switched back to the normal perspective, and a joyful smile appeared on Eisen's face. With this feature, Eisen is much more convenient when operating. In addition to familiar places, he can move at any time by observing the situation in a certain place. In this way, the security of Eisen is greatly improved. Eisen, who was in a good mood, played happily in the next time. Occasionally, he will travel around when no one is around, combining the god's perspective and apparition opened by the observation feature. Since he was able to perfectly control the magic power in his body, Eisen did not encounter any unexpected situations, nor was he discovered by the Ministry of Magic. For 2 full months, Eisen basically visited the whole of Britain. However, while Eisen was enjoying traveling, Harry was living in dire straits. Yes, poor Harry, even though he became a wizard, he still couldn't change the Vernon family's attitude towards him. What made him even more sad was that no one wrote to him throughout the holiday. Harry suspected that Ron was lying to him by inviting him to his house. Of course, Harry also met Dobby, the Malfoy elf, and was warned not to go to Hogwarts. Fortunately, just a few days after Harry's birthday, he was rescued by Ron driving a flying car. As for being warned by Dobby that something bad would happen at Hogwarts, Harry didn't care. For Harry, living at Ron's was very different from living with the Dursleys. Whether it's magic props or various delicacies, Harry couldn't think of leaving. Seeing that it was almost the end of the summer vacation, Eisen finally calmed down. During the period, I don't know if Eisen's brain had a twitch, and he experienced the feeling of a night bus on a whim. To be honest, the night bus is really fast enough. Not only can it move at high speed, but it can also vomit people. Anyway, Eisen vowed never to try again. On the last day of August, after Eisen packed everything away, he slept in the leaky cauldron before arriving at King's Cross the next morning. That's right, Eisen still plans to go to Hogwarts from here. Chapter 60. Harry and Ron who didn't catch up. For Eisen, increased power means less urgency. Because of this, Eisen travels around during the summer vacation. And I don't know if it's an illusion, after a freewheeling trip, Eisen's transfiguration seems to be about to break through the bottleneck. I don't know if it has something to do with his open mind. Sitting in the compartment at the end of the train, Eisen leaned against the backrest and concentrated on experimenting with the spell. A flame rose and changed in his palm, turning into water for a while, and lightning for a while. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, yet we're reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwoyudu here. But it can be seen that this transformation is extremely jerky, and there is almost no room for practical use. But fortunately, this is a good start. As long as you practice often in the future, you will become proficient. Yawning, Eisen stopped practicing, then took out a playing card from the storage ring, turned it into a black hat and covered his face, and fell into a deep sleep. No way. Practicing transfiguration nonstop for several days really made Eisen's energy a bit weak. Through this experience, Eisen is absolutely sure that if a person concentrates on practicing a spell for a long time, he will indeed be very tired afterwards. Anyway, the Hogwarts Express was perfectly safe, so Eisen took this opportunity to take a break. During this period, students continued to board the Hogwarts Express, and there were also noisy voices around, but Eisen was not affected by it. Suddenly, the train was already moving, but at this moment, an anxious voice rang in Eisen's ear. Professor Eisen, wake up. There was a slight pause in the voice, and a small hand pushed on Eisen's arm. Shocked, Eisen took off the hat with his hand, stretched his waist, and yawned a long time at the same time. Afterwards, the hat in his hand turned back into poker and was put away. Turning his head to look, Eisen noticed that there were two little girls in front of him, one with long brown hair and one with long red hair. Well, it's Hermione and Ginny. However, the two of them looked at him at this moment, with worried expressions on their faces. Hermione and Ginny. What's the matter? Eisen asked. He took a break before, and now Eisen's energy has recovered a lot. Yes, Harry and Ron missed the car. Hermione nodded. Missed the car? Eisen was taken aback for a moment, and then suddenly realized that he already knew what was going on. If I'm not mistaken, after Dobby warned Harry not to go to Hogwarts during the summer vacation, Harry ignored it. So, Dobby directly blocked Platform 9 3/4 from casting spells, and now directly blocked Harry and Ron from the platform. In fact, in this situation, what Harry and Ron should do is to owl the professor at the school to explain the situation, but they are Gryffindor's adventurous lion cubs. So, the two of them worked together, drove Mr. Weasley's flying car out, and chased the Hogwarts Express all the way to the school. Are you sure they didn't get in the car, and they weren't playing a prank with you? Although he knew what was going on, Eisen still wanted to double-check. No, they followed me, but I didn't see them coming out of the aisle until the train started. Although it was not the first time we met, Ginny was still a little restrained when facing Eisen, but fortunately, she put things aside make it clear. Okay, let's take a look. Where are Harry and Ron? Nodding, Eisen hesitated for a moment and took out the scope. Yes, Eisen thought about not exposing the existence of the observation mirror to outsiders, but then he thought again. Even if Hermione and Ginny found out, it wouldn't be a big deal. King's Cross Station, Platform 9 3/4. Eisen tapped the observation mirror with his wand, and as the top of the wand cast a faint light, the observation mirror showed the surrounding area of Platform 9 3/4 scene. Apparently, this is a method deliberately used by Eisen in order to prevent all the actual functions of the observation mirror from being revealed. Hermione leaned over with a look of surprise and sat down next to Eisen. Her gaze fell on the sight glass. Ginny on the side also raised her head and looked over. Harry and Ron aren't there. That's the staff of the Ministry of Magic. Eisen didn't see the Savior and his little friends on the platform, but saw a guy in a strange costume detecting something around him, obviously dealing with an event that might arouse Muggle suspicion. They won't be captured by the Ministry of Magic. Ginny's face was even more worried, and tears even rolled in her eyes. Don't worry, let me see where they are. Eisen continued to point his wand at the scope after comforting him. Tell me, where are Harry Potter and Ron Weiss? The picture in the mirror changed for a while, and then Harry and Ron were revealed. I saw Ron flying freely in the sky in a flying car, and Harry was sitting in the co-pilot seat with an excited expression on his face. Well, the two were traveling through the clouds above the Hogwarts Express. But in fact, Eisen has actively opened the god's perspective of observing characteristics while observing platform 9 3/4 from the observation mirror. Under the observation from God's perspective, with Eisen as the center, everything within a radius of 5 miles is clearly reflected in his mind. He clearly sees a flying car above the Hogwarts Express that has been chasing after him. Abandoned. Therefore, when Eisen revealed the figures of Harry and Ron in the observation mirror, he directly located them. Subsequently, Eisen turned off the God view of the observation feature. I think Harry and Ron should be right above us. From the observation mirror, it can be seen from several changes of perspective that the two are flying in the sky, and the figure of the train can be seen below. Oh! Both showed confused expressions. God, this is too dangerous. They'll be fired. Hermione couldn't help screaming. Well, I think you can go to Fred and George first and ask them to owl Professor McGonagall. Eisen said, don't worry, I will watch Harry and Ron and won't put them in danger. Now that Eisen knew about Harry and Ron flying in the sky, especially in front of Hermione and Ginny, Eisen couldn't ignore it. Hearing what Eisen said, the worry on Hermione's face faded away, and she and Ginny left the cubicle. To be honest, with Eisen's current methods, Harry and Ron could be successfully saved. For example, directly apparate to Harry and Ron, then grab them and apparate to the train. Or, teleport directly to the two of them. Directly use the magic spell to make them smaller together with the car, and then teleport back. This approach can be done, but it is a little too arrogant. Obviously, such a high-profile behavior is very resistant to the current Eisen. Even if no one saw what he did, how could he explain it to others? Besides, even if Eisen didn't make a move, both Harry and Ron would reach Hogwarts without incident. Therefore, right now, Eisen only needs to keep an eye on the two of them, and cast spells to protect them when they are in danger. Speaking of which, driving a car and flying in the sky should be a good experience. Unknowingly, Eisen's thinking completely diverged. Whoa, are Ron and Harry really flying in cars? This is so cool, why didn't we think of it? Noisy voices sounded, interrupting Eisen's thoughts. Volume 2. Chapter 1 on the train. Fred and George came to the compartment where Eisen was sitting excitedly, but they kept talking. The ones who came in after the two were Hermione and Ginny, who had just left. It's just that both of them pulled their faces in this matter, looking very unhappy. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. Obviously, perhaps it was the content of the conversation between Fred and George that made them a little angry. Wow, come and see, great Ron, great Harry, they are so good. Fred exclaimed when he saw what appeared in the scope in Eisen's hand. While amazed, there was a trace of remorse on their faces, probably thinking why they hadn't thought of doing this themselves. But then he seemed to have thought of something, and looked at George with a look of surprise. Professor, how is this thing made? George stared at the observation mirror, curious about knowledge. We also have one, Fred said as he looked to the side. His voice suddenly lowered. Well, a very similar thing, but you can only see Hogwarts Castle. Don't make trouble anymore. You didn't see that Harry is so dangerous. Seeing Fred and George chattering around Eisen, Ginny finally couldn't help pulling them away. Oh, yes, I don't know who has been talking about Harry all summer. Fred winked at Eisen strangely and left the carriage with George laughing. Professor, goodbye to school. When leaving, George waved to Eisen and pointed to the observation mirror in his hand. Obviously, the Weasley twins are still thinking about his scope, and they plan to talk about it at school. Don't worry, I'm paying attention to them. Harry is not in danger now. Eisen looked at the flying car following Hogwarts through the viewing mirror and comforted Ginny. Who would have thought that after hearing these words, Ginny's face would immediately turn red? Eisen was stunned for a moment and immediately put his gaze on the observation mirror, pretending not to see Ginny's face. Only then did he realize that Ginny had always been Harry Potter's little fangirl, and she had always liked Harry. Well, Eisen can only think that this situation is normal in the wizarding world. Then, as if thinking of something, Eisen turned to look at Hermione and found that she was staring at him. Seeing that she was looking at her and their eyes met, Hermione hurriedly buried her head on Wandering with Werewolves. Her face turned slightly red. Seeing the posture of the little fangirl, Eisen's self-confidence inexplicably increased again. Haha, it seems that my appearance is still very online. Pooh. Thinking about it, Eisen couldn't help laughing. When he came back to his senses, he saw Hermione and Ginny looked at him in bewilderment, as if wondering what he was laughing at. Ahem. Seeing the expressions of the two, Eisen felt his face turn red. He secretly rubbed his chin with one hand, and was relieved to find that there was nothing unusual, but he still coughed to cover up his embarrassment. Hermione. Eisen immediately suppressed his smile and began to change the subject. The second-year defense against the dark arts professor is Gilderoy Lockhart. What do you think of the new professor? Oh, yes, I saw him at Lehan Bookstore. Obviously, Hermione had already paid attention to the people whose name was Lockhart on the book list. The book describes some of his wonderful experiences, which are really fascinating, Hermione said, picking up the book, wandering with werewolves, for a moment. Perhaps with the Eisen jewels in the foreground, Hermione doesn't seem to adore Lockhart as much as in the original. But there is no doubt that she was still drawn to those adventures. Oh, can I take a look? Although he knew what kind of person Lockhart was, Eisen suddenly became interested. Then, Hermione obediently handed the book to Eisen. A few minutes later, Eisen closed the book and returned it to Hermione. Well, I have to say, it's fascinating just from the details of the adventure described in the book. From Eisen's point of view, if one has not actually experienced those adventures, it is absolutely impossible to write such a wonderful process. If all of this is really true of Lockhart, there's no question he's a pretty good guy. But alas, Eisen knows that these adventures are stolen by Lockhart. Yes, other people's adventures can be stolen too. Magic is what it is. To put it simply, Lockhart learned about the other person's adventures from other people's mouths, and then used the forgetting spell to make the other person forget about it. And just like that, someone else's adventure became Lockhart's own. Lockhart would be an excellent defense against the dark arts professor if only based on these experiences. After returning the book to Hermione, Eisen gave such a conclusion. No way, although Eisen knew that Lockhart was a liar without much skill, but he couldn't say it directly. Hermione nodded and didn't say anything, but just as she was about to open the book, as if she suddenly remembered something, she leaned over to Eisen, showing a mysterious look. Professor Eisen, I encountered a strange thing during the summer vacation. Hermione glanced at Ginny and simply went directly to Eisen's side. What makes you feel weird? During the summer vacation, my dad took my mom and I to a movie called The Man from Earth, Hermione said, staring at Eisen with wide eyes. Yes, I said that I opened a film company in the Muggle world, and I was the one who opened the Eisen film company that produced The Man from Earth. But this is not a strange thing. Hearing Hermione's words afterwards, Eisen felt it was just too much of a coincidence. You said, since Hermione has become a witch, why did she go to the movies with her family? It's nothing more than watching a movie, but I just saw a movie produced and released by Eisen Film Company. Professor Eisen, is there really someone who lived to be 14,000 years old? However, Hermione unexpectedly asked a question that stumped Eisen. How is it possible? You know it, Philosopher's Stone. Well, Nicole Flamel has only lived for more than 600 years. Eisen retorted directly using the only example in the wizarding world, Nicole Flamel, as an example. But I met a strange person in the movie theater. When I was discussing with my dad that there is no such person in reality, he said, how can you be sure it's fake? Even so, there's nothing strange about it. Maybe it's someone who likes to fantasize. But the strange thing is, I only heard this voice, but where is the person who didn't see him? You mean, the person who said that could be a wizard? Having said that, Eisen showed a pensive expression. I don't know. Hermione shook her head. Whether it's a wizard or not, it's very strange, otherwise, why would he say that? Okay, don't think about it. Maybe it's just other people talking about the plot of the movie. Actually, this was not nonsense, and then Eisen waved his hand to signal Hermione to stop thinking about it. Oh well. Hermione shut her mouth obediently and turned her attention back to her book. As time went by, the sky got darker, and the Hogwarts Express train also arrived at its destination. Chapter 2 Harry and Ron caught in the present. Okay, hurry to school. I'll go and see Harry and Ron, so they won't get hurt. When getting off the train at Hogsmeade Station, Eisen put away the scope and told Hermione and Ginny. Okay, Professor Eisen, goodbye at school. Hermione waved to Eisen, then pulled Ginny away. Speaking of which, the way of admission to Hogwarts is very interesting to Eisen. It is said that before the Hogwarts Express train was opened, little wizards were admitted to school through the portkey. But unfortunately, almost half of the little wizards can't find the portkey every year, or the transmission is wrong and they can't make it to school. Now, when first-year wizards enter school, they need to be led by Hagrid into the school by boat from the Black Lake. As for the students in the 2nd to 7th grades, they need to ride the Thestral carriage around Hogwarts Castle after getting off the bus, and then enter the school through the gate. This special ceremony seems to have no effect in Eisen's view, but for Hogwarts, it may be a tradition. After getting out of the car, Eisen had already turned on the God view, and immediately, everything within a 5-mile radius came into his mind. As Eisen expected, Harry and Ron were driving the car towards Hogwarts. However, there is still a distance from a distance. If there is no accident, the two will successfully land in Hogwarts before the car is damaged, but they will also crash into the Whomping Willow and be beaten together with the car. So, Eisen took a look at the wizards of all grades rushing towards Hogwarts Castle and walked directly in the direction of the Whomping Willow. Eisen came to the edge of the Whomping Willow, and within a few minutes of waiting, he saw a car passing through the fence, flying from the greenhouse in the vegetable field, and crashing straight towards the Whomping Willow. Come on, stop, stop. Watch out for that tree. Eisen also heard Ron and Harry panicking. If nothing else happened, the car driven by the two would crash into the Whomping Willow, and they would be beaten up by the Whomping Willow. But since Eisen is here, he will naturally save them. From a god's perspective, Eisen stared at Harry, then took out his wand and pointed it at him. Then, a playing card flew out of Harry's body, and the infinity symbol on it shone brightly, and then flew out of the car and changed into a metal ball, directly surrounding the whole car. Kala. The loud sound of metal colliding with trees then resounded in this silent grassland. Because the shape of the metal ball is too different from that of the car, it was not stuck in the tree by the beating man Lu, but was stopped and immediately bounced backwards and fell to the ground not far away. The branches of the Whomping Willow moved a few times, but because they couldn't reach them, there was no movement in the end. After the metal ball in the distance bounced to the ground, it turned into a playing card again and slipped into Harry's pocket. I knew it. It must be Professor Eisen who saved us. Harry, who saw everything in the car, suddenly exclaimed. The tone was full of surprises. It's really great, Ron nodded, and before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly screamed and was ejected from the car. Not sure if the car had been enchanted, Harry and Ron were ejected as well. My wand. As soon as he stood up, Ron found that his wand was completely disconnected except for a few thin pieces of wood that were still connected. Suddenly, Ron, who was happy because he was rescued before, screamed in an instant. Bang bang. The trunk of the car opened automatically, and the suitcases of the two were also ejected. In fact, it stands to reason that the two of them do not need to carry suitcases. After all, they already had the storage ring from Eisen. But obviously, the two little wizards still chose to do this in order to conceal the existence of the storage ring. You guys are really amazing. It's fine if you don't take the Hogwarts Express, but you actually came here in a flying car. If Hermione and Ginny hadn't told me about this, you would have been thrown to your death. He stared at the two before, but his tone was quite severe. Although Eisen really didn't need to show them embarrassment, as a professor, it was not his attitude not to ask questions when he knew that students made mistakes. Professor Eisen, we missed the train. Harry pursed his lips, held Hedwig's cage in his hand, and explained in a low voice. That's right, platform 9 3/4 has been blocked by someone. We can't get in. Ron also took the opportunity to quickly nod in agreement. However, you can use an owl to write to Headmaster Dumbledore, or to Professor McGonagall. Eisen's stern expression softened slightly, and he took a meaningful look at the owl in Harry's arms. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, yet we're reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwoyudu here. Yes, although Ron's pet is Scabbers the mouse, Harry has Hedwig with him. I didn't expect. Harry was stunned for a moment. That's right, how could he not have thought of something that was obviously easy to think of at the time? So Harry had to stammer out his reasons. Oh, come with me. I hope Principal Dumbledore and the others can accept your statement later. Eisen raised his eyebrows, gestured to the two of them, and then walked towards the castle. Harry and Ron glanced at each other, then followed dejectedly. Walking through all the way, no one spoke, and the atmosphere became quiet for a while. Although Eisen was walking in front, but from time to time, he turned on the god's perspective of observation characteristics, but he could perfectly see the expressions of Harry and Ron behind him. I have to say that with the perfect level of observation features, it is really convenient. After climbing the steps, Eisen, Harry, and Ron behind him entered the hall respectively. A few torches were lit inside, making the slightly empty hall bright. After entering the foyer, bursts of cheers can be heard from the auditorium next to it. Apparently, the sorting ceremony and welcome party were going on over there. Eisen didn't take them in, but took them directly to the Muggle Studies classroom on the second floor. You guys have to stay here. I think I need to find Professor McGonagall. Seeing the two of them follow him in, Eisen nodded and turned to leave. In less than 10 minutes, Eisen was back. That's right, after the sorting ceremony was over, Eisen briefly talked about the matter. But what he didn't expect was that not only Professor McGonagall, but also Dumbledore and Snape followed. For Harry and Ron, they didn't feel that there was anything wrong with Eisen alone, but when Professor McGonagall surrounded them with Professor Dumbledore and Professor Snape, the low-pressure atmosphere simply made them out of breath. Sit. Seeing Harry and Ron stand up with a look of bewilderment, Professor McGonagall pursed his lips and escaped from his wand. Harry and Ron, who thought that Professor McGonagall was about to cast a spell, immediately took a few steps back. Seeing that there was no magic spell falling on him, he breathed a sigh of relief and sat on the stool. Don't you explain it? Professor McGonagall's glasses shone coldly. Humph, Snape snorted coldly, and threw a copy of Evening Prophet on Harry. How serious is it? Looking at the stern expressions of the professors, Harry finally knew what a bad feeling was. After unfolding the newspaper, a piece of news caught his eyes. 2 muggles in London are convinced they saw an old car fly over the post office, Mr. Angus Fleet reported to the police. At a cursory glance, Harry knew that a total of 6 or 7 muggles had already knowing his and Ron's feet. Then, Harry handed the newspaper to Ron. After Ron saw it, his complexion was obviously worse than Harry's. I remember your father working in the misuse of muggle substances division, but I didn't expect his own son to, Snape said sinisterly to Ron, as if adding fuel to the fire. Right now, Ron was on the verge of tears. Chapter 3 Lockhart with a strong desire to express. So, please explain why you did this? Dumbledore's expression was very serious, but his tone was exceptionally calm. Sensing a little disappointment in Dumbledore's tone, Harry suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. He didn't dare to look him in the eyes, so he could only lower his head and tell the whole story. Of course, when referring to the flying car, he just said that he and Ron happened to meet a flying car on the side of the road and didn't say that it was Mr. Weasley's car. But Eisen noticed that the 3 professors didn't believe Harry's rhetoric, and they had already seen through everything. After Harry finished speaking, Dumbledore didn't react, but stared at them calmly. To be honest, none of this is a big deal to Eisen. If other little wizards dared to drive around in the sky in flying cars and were discovered by muggles, then they might have to worry about whether they would be expelled. But on Harry, Eisen felt that there was no problem at all. After all, Harry was the savior, the one who really saved the world. Even though Harry was only a baby at the time, there was no doubt that Voldemort had failed against Harry. In this way, the British wizarding world has escaped a catastrophe. It is precisely because of this that Harry is so famous in the wizarding world. So anyone who knows the name of Harry Potter will feel like seeing his idol. If he was expelled for riding a flying car, then the wizards in the entire wizarding world would probably have to overthrow Hogwarts. Although they may not be able to lift it, this is the weight of the savior. Okay, let's go pack our things. The atmosphere was so tense that Ron finally couldn't help but speak. While speaking, there was a look of despair on his face. What are you talking about? Professor McGonagall looked at him suspiciously. We're fired, aren't we? He couldn't think about how to tell his family about it. Do you want to say to them, congratulations, there is finally an expelled Gryffindor from the Weasley family? Oh, they'll kill him. Hearing Ron's words, Harry looked at Dumbledore in a hurry, as if waiting for the next sentence. Not today. Dumbledore shook his head. I mean, I have to let you know the seriousness of the matter, Mr. Weasley, and I'll be writing to your family tonight. And I have to tell you, if there is a next time, I can only fire you. Originally thought that Harry could be punished well, but he didn't expect Dumbledore to handle it so lightly. Finally, Snape couldn't help but said, Professor Dumbledore, these 2 students ignored the regulations restricting the use of magic by underage wizards, and made a big deal on a precious tree. The tree did a lot of damage, and of course had to be. The book chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years. Yeah, we're reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwoyudu here. Well, Severus, let Professor McGonagall decide their punishment. They are Gryffindor students, and she should make the decision. Dumbledore interrupted Snape. I think I must go back to the banquet. There are several announcements to make. Come on, Severus. Dumbledore winked at Snape, then gestured to Eisen. Well, this is for Harry and Ron to be taught by Professor McGonagall alone. When Eisen was sitting in the professor's seat, he found that the sorting ceremony was over. Not surprisingly, Ginny Weiss was also assigned to Gryffindor. Since Harry and Ron were away, Hermione and Ginny were sitting together talking about something. When Hermione saw Eisen take the professor's seat, she nodded at him. After Eisen also nodded at Hermione, he turned his attention to the professor's seat. That's right, when the new school year started, the position originally belonged to Professor Quirrell was replaced by another person. A young wizard in aqua green robes, who should be a few years older than Eisen, but not 30 years old. Obviously, this is the new defense against the dark arts teacher Gilderoy Lockhart. In all fairness, this Professor Lockhart is indeed handsome. Compared with Eisen himself, Lockhart is not much more handsome than him, but because of a little more mature temperament on his body, and the smile on his face all the time, he suddenly becomes a charming uncle who is especially popular with little girls. When Eisen participated in the orientation party of the opening ceremony for the first time, Eisen still felt that it was very novel, but the feeling of novelty disappeared after the second time. Hello, I heard from Hagrid that you are the professor of astronomy, Eisen Turner. Just when Eisen was bored, a voice rang in Eisen's ear. Eisen frowned and looked over, and found that the guy in green was already sitting beside him. Oh, I'm Gilderoy Lockhart, 3rd class of the Order of Merlin, honorary member of the Defense Against the Dark Arts, 5-time Wizard's Weekly Award for Most Charming Smile, but I never say that. I don't deal with trouble with a smile. Lockhart introduced himself incessantly, as if Eisen's good looks threatened him, so he also showed his trademark smile while talking. Then, Lockhart held out his hand to Eisen, as if waiting for Eisen to shake his hand with an adoring expression. To be honest, it was beyond Eisen's expectation to do such a thing at the opening ceremony. He thought that even if Lockhart was a fake professor, he could still distinguish the situation. But what I didn't expect was that Lockhart's head was so hard. He came up to chat with Eisen directly. Hello, Professor Lockhart. Welcome to Hogwarts. Although Eisen didn't react for a moment, he had to shake hands with Lockhart. However, Eisen couldn't help complaining in his heart when shaking hands with Lockhart. You said you never talk about it, so why do you always talk about it when you introduce yourself? Looking at the smiling face in front of him, Eisen suddenly had the urge to punch him. Okay, be quiet. After Dumbledore's voice, the students sitting at the table fell silent instantly. I want to introduce to everyone. This is the new defense against the dark arts professor, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart. Everyone is welcome. Lockhart, who was about to pull Eisen to continue talking, immediately stood up from his seat when he heard this scene, showing his trademark smile. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, 3rd class of the Order of Merlin, honorary member of the Defense Against the Dark Arts, 5-time Wizard's Weekly Award for Most Charming Smile, but I never say that. I don't smile come to expel Wan Luan's female ghost. After finishing speaking, Lockhart bent over in a very gentlemanly manner. Hiss. Eisen only felt that his eyelids were twitching non-stop, and he had an urge to run away directly. Looking at the other professors, especially Snape, his face showed an extremely obvious look of disdain. However, Lockhart's current personality is too perfect, so after Lockhart introduced himself, many girls cheered. Even though Hermione didn't adore him as much as in the original book, she gave her applause without hesitation. On the contrary, many boys showed expressions of disapproval. Probably, this is the reason for same-sex repulsion. After the opening ceremony was over, Eisen had already returned to the dormitory to rest. Chapter 4: The Powerful Roaring Letter. Since the new school year had just started, Eisen didn't go to the response room to practice the spell when he went back at night, but went to bed early. Eisen understands that although his transfiguration has made some breakthroughs, it still takes a long time to master the new skills perfectly. Therefore, there is no need to rush for a while. It is already the 2nd school year for the trio of saviors to enroll. If there is no accident, then the next big event will revolve around the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. Of course, a key prop is the diary given to Ginny by Lucius Malfoy. Speaking of it, this diary is not simple. It is actually the first Horcrux that Voldemort made. When Voldemort was still in school, he opened the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets and controlled the basilisk with the talent of the basilisk, and then murdered a Muggleborn which Myrtle Warren, that is, has been draining the pipe. Weeping Myrtle lingers within. It was this murder that he used to split his soul and store it in his diary to create the first Horcrux. Moreover, Voldemort was very cunning. He blamed the murder on Aragog, Hagrid's acromantula, which caused Hagrid to be expelled from Hogwarts. Later, Voldemort handed over the first Horcrux diary he made to his subordinate Lucius Malfoy for safekeeping. Right now, since the Ministry of Magic has started a large-scale search of dangerous items, Lucius secretly slipped it to Ginny when he was at the Lehan bookstore. The next thing, if there is no accident, the diary will use Ginny's hand to make troubles in Hogwarts school, and finally almost come back to life. The next morning, Eisen went to the auditorium to have breakfast as usual. Under the enchanted ceiling, for long tables were laden with dishes. While the students were eating, they were talking about something with great interest. Pay a little attention and you'll see that the center of the conversation is Harry and Ron. Yes, for Harry and Ron to come to Hogwarts in a flying car, most of the students gave them amazed and envious eyes. However, Eisen noticed that when Hermione was flipping through a copy of Traveling with Vampires, her expression was very stern. Even saying hello didn't give Harry a good face. It seemed that Hermione, who was a good student, still had a hard time with Harry and Ron's outrageous way of coming to school. Eisen, who had just eaten a piece of bread and was drinking milk, suddenly and acutely heard a buzzing noise. Looking up, I saw hundreds of owls flying from outside, circling over the auditorium. Then, one by one, they threw the packages or letters onto the 4 long tables, and were caught by the students who were chatting one by one. Obviously, this is a gift or letter from the student's parents to the student. Errol. Just then, Ron yelled and caught Eisen's attention. I saw a gray owl lying on the table with a red letter in its beak. Oh, no. As if thinking of something horrific, Ron couldn't help but put his hands on his head. Don't worry, it's still alive. Harry poked the owl with his hand, and when he found that the owl was still moving, he patted Ron on the shoulder comfortingly. No, that's what I was talking about. Ron pointed to the red envelope on Errol's mouth, shaking his head with a troubled expression. What's the matter? Harry showed a puzzled expression, and even Hermione was attracted to him. Looking at this scene, a smile appeared on Eisen's face. If I'm not mistaken, the red envelope must be the Howler letter. Well, it's like watching a play. My mother sent me a Howler letter. Ron swallowed hard, wondering if he should open it or not. Ron, You'd better open it. It's worse if you don't. My grandma sent me a howler letter. I didn't open it, and it turned out horrible. Neville tried to persuade Ron, but he didn't know if thinking of the terrible consequences. He took a deep breath. What is a howler letter? Seeing the terrified expressions of Ron and Neville, Harry felt a little strange. Could it be that there is danger? To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, changed sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa to Android and Apple are all available. The red letter was already smoking, and Ron's brow was sweating, and he was so focused on it that he ignored Harry's question. Open it quickly, or there will be no time. Neville urged in a low voice. There is no way. This kind of thing cannot be avoided. Ron was terrified as soon as possible, but still stretched out his trembling hands, took the envelope from Errol's mouth, and gently tore it open. The roar immediately resounded throughout the auditorium, and Harry was stunned for a moment. He finally knew what a howler letter was. Neville next to him blocked his ears in advance, and Hermione quickly covered her ears after being startled. Come on, Ron Weiss, you are really capable. Stealing the car, I wouldn't be surprised if they fired you, and see what I do with you. You probably didn't even think about it. Me, and how did your father feel when he found out that the car was gone? This was Mrs. Weasley's voice. The volume was 100 times louder than usual, and even the dishes and spoons on the table were rattling. To be honest, at this moment, Eisen was also a little dumbfounded, because he knew this famous scene, and he had seen such a scene in a movie deep in his memory, but he didn't remember that the roaring letter was so powerful that it almost shook the entire auditorium. Everyone in the auditorium fell silent for an instant, and then saw Ron huddled in a chair, only seeing a flushed forehead. Received Dumbledore's letter last night. Your father almost died of shame. How could you do such a thing? You and Harry almost lost their lives. The sound of hitting the eardrums made Harry shrink back down. Your father will be censored at the Ministry of Magic, and it's all your fault. If you don't follow the rules, we'll bring you back right away. The voice of the roaring letter finally stopped, and then Eisen's slightly dull gaze burning, curling and dissipating into ashes. Turning his gaze to Ron and Harry, he saw that they didn't come back to their senses for a long while. Afterwards, whispers continued to ring out in the surrounding area, and the quiet auditorium gradually became lively again. Don't you expect anything else? Don't think about it. Hermione took away her hand from her ears, closed, sailing with vampires, and glared at Ron. I see. Stop talking. Ron interrupted Hermione's reprimand angrily. After breakfast, Professor McGonagall handed out Gryffindor's class schedule one by one, and Harry and the others will have herbal medicine as their first class. As for Eisen himself, he came to the library on the second floor. After finding a copy of The Mystery of Transfiguration from the bookshelf, Eisen sat at the table. However, Eisen was not in a hurry to read this book, but was thinking about the scene that happened in the auditorium earlier. All this time, Eisen didn't think much about it, until he saw the power of the roaring letter this time. He suddenly had some ideas. That is to apply the roar letter to the battle. Yes, this idea seems very ridiculous, but if you think about it from another angle, there is definitely room for transformation of the howling letter. For example, the roar letter can only be triggered after it is disassembled, but if it is transformed and touched the target, it will be triggered directly. Isn't that very sour? However, Eisen was immediately discouraged when he thought that there was a magic spell to block ears in the wizarding world. Because even if it is really transformed into an instant-triggered roar letter, it seems that it can only be used to sneak attack when the opponent is not paying attention. In this case, the restriction is too great. This also means that owls cannot be used to send messages to the target, and the roaring letter must be sent to the target with the flying curse at close range. But if it's a close-range confrontation, isn't it too low-level to throw a roar letter? After all, if you have this skill, you can just use the attack spell directly. Shaking his head and clearing the thought from his mind, Eisen focused on the book in his hand, and gradually became addicted to it. Chapter 5 Inspiration. Time passed slowly, and when Eisen closed The Mystery of Transfiguration again, it was time for lunch break. Eisen, who has been training as a core ability, pays great attention to the magical ability of transfiguration. Previously, he felt that his level of transfiguration had reached a very advanced level. From his own memory and cognition, since he was able to transform elements, he felt that few people could surpass him in transfiguration. That's right, although Eisen wanted to say that his level of transfiguration had surpassed Dumbledore, but he was the greatest wizard in the world anyway, so Eisen couldn't easily draw such a conclusion anyway. However, the more he studied transfiguration, the more Eisen felt that transfiguration was inscrutable. Sometimes, Eisen even suspects that transfiguration and other spells are completely different systems. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. Because if transfiguration is powerful enough, then transfiguration seems to be able to do to a large extent what the spell can do. For example, attack spells, defense spells, and transfiguration can obviously be done. As far as Eisen's current level is concerned, the fire curse attacks the enemy by releasing flames, but Eisen can use transfiguration to directly turn any substance into flames. The petrification spell and the freezing spell, Eisen can also achieve the same effect through polymorphing. This time around, many of the ideas and arcana of transfiguration inspired Eisen a lot, and inspired him. For example, there is a technique of polymorphism that can change the food prepared in advance into the eyes, like Dumbledore conjuring dinner for the students. At first glance, such a method is actually transfiguration. Isn't it strange? Because of transfiguration, judging from the name, the core effect is deformation. But what's the point of conjuring food from other places out of thin air? This is obviously another kind of teleportation. So, after thinking about it, Eisen thought about whether it is possible to combine the theory of apparition and transfiguration. If Eisen can really combine these two kinds of magic, maybe he can bypass the limitation of Hogwarts' inability to apparate. After all, Hogwarts does have strong protection against magic and anti-apparition restrictions, but it is clear that Hogwarts does not restrict transfiguration. That is to say, if a new apparition spell can really be created with this, wouldn't it be possible to teleport in Hogwarts at will? Thinking of this, Eisen suddenly lost interest in reading in the library. Then he put the transfiguration mystery back on the bookshelf, turned, and left the library. When Eisen came to the auditorium for lunch, he found that Ron was clutching his wand depressedly, stuffing pieces of meat into his mouth forcefully, and waving his wand constantly. What's the matter? Is there something wrong? Seeing Ron's slightly exasperated expression, Eisen stepped forward to ask a question curiously, and then sat down next to Hermione. Ron's wand broke yesterday. Harry sympathized. Yes, thanks to the professor for saving me and Harry that day, but when the car rolled over, my wand accidentally broke. Ron was a little downcast and first thanked Eisen for his actions that day, but then the damage his wand held out for him to watch. Oh, that's unfortunate. Eisen shrugged, looking at the wand wrapped in magic tape several times in front of him. Although he wanted to gloat and laugh a few times, but in order not to make him angry, let it go. Professor Eisen, look! Hermione tugged at Eisen's arm and called out, expectant in her tone. Eisen turned his gaze to Hermione, and saw Hermione wave her wand at a beetle, and the beetle turned into a beautiful button. Excellent transfiguration, Hermione. I think Professor McGonagall must have given you extra points. Eisen looked at the little fangirl in front of him and couldn't help but admire. Hearing Eisen's compliment, Hermione blushed slightly, but smiled happily. Of course, she didn't see that Ron's face was getting darker and darker. Ron, write a letter to go home and ask for another wand. Perhaps seeing Ron's loss, Harry quickly comforted him and proposed a solution. Yeah, and then got a howler letter. Ron had a troubled look on his face. He could already predict what would happen. Yelled in front of hundreds of wizards in the Great Hall. Your wand is broken, blame yourself? Afterwards, Ron put away the broken wand. By the way, what's your next class? Eisen changed the subject. Well, it's Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Hermione replied, taking out the timetable. You circled Lockhart's class. Ron held the class schedule in front of him and said, but suddenly showed a very surprised expression. Hey, why did you circle Professor Eisen's class with a heart shape? Hermione glanced at Eisen carefully, and when she saw Eisen's slightly surprised expression, her face immediately turned red, and then she snatched the timetable from Ron's hand without saying a word of annoyance. Hello, are you Harry? Just then, a timid voice rang out. Eisen turned his head to look, only to find that it was a very thin boy. The little boy with gray hair stared at Harry as if possessed. He was also holding something that looked like a normal camera from the Muggle world. You are? Harry looked at the other party in a daze, because he didn't have time to attend the sorting ceremony, so he didn't know who the little boy in front of him was. My name is Colin Creevey, and I'm also in Gryffindor. Colin was a little shy to be looked at by Harry like this, but he still summoned up the courage to take a step forward and introduce himself. Do you think, is it possible, that I can take a picture of you? Colin held up the camera in his hand and stated his purpose. Taking pictures? Harry still looked confused, obviously underestimating his own name. Yes, so I can prove that I saw you. I know everything about you, and everyone is talking about how you escaped who disappeared in the end, and you have a lightning bolt on your forehead. The scar, Colin said excitedly, and kept sweeping his gaze across Harry's forehead, as if looking for the iconic scar. Someone in my dormitory said that if you use the correct revealing potion, the people in the photo will move, which is really interesting, isn't it? Colin took a deep breath, and his whole body was about to tremble. I mean, until I got my acceptance letter to Hogwarts, I never knew the weird things I would do were magic, and my dad was a milkman, and he couldn't believe it either. So I'm going to take a bunch of pictures show him dash. Oh, it turned out to be a little Muggle-born wizard. Seeing the excited little boy in front of him, Eisen basically understood what was going on. Maybe I can stand by your side and ask your friend to press it for you, and then you can sign it, Colin said. Seeing that Harry still didn't speak, he even showed a begging expression on his face. Signed photo? Harry Potter, are you sending signed photos? Malfoy's loud voice sounded directly, and many people heard it. I go. Seeing Malfoy who suddenly appeared, Eisen couldn't help but rubbed his forehead, and then complained inwardly. In terms of feelings, Malfoy and Harry are really enemies. Everyone line up. Mr. Potter is going to send out signed photos. Malfoy yelled towards the crowd, followed by Crabbe and Goyle. The two big men were also giggling. I didn't. Harry clenched his fists and glared at Malfoy. Eat slugs, Malfoy. Seeing that the annoying Malfoy came to find trouble again, Ron looked at him angrily. Wow, be careful, Wes, come on, don't cause trouble anymore. If you don't play by the rules, your mother will take you back. Malfoy sneered at Ron. Then, several of Slytherin's students burst out laughing. Chapter 6 Eisen's Proposal. Professor Eisen, who was watching the play, suddenly felt his arm being grabbed by a small hand, and turned his head to find that it was Hermione. She pursed her lips and looked at him worriedly. Ahem, well, don't worry about Harry and them. Eisen had to comfort Hermione. It seemed that he couldn't continue watching the show. Otherwise, Hermione would probably have a grudge against him. However, before Eisen could make a move, the situation on the court had changed. What's going on? What's going on? A figure in a turquoise robe walked through the crowd and came to them. Who is sending out signed photos? Obviously, that iconic smile let people know he was Gilderoy Lockhart. Harry wanted to explain, but Lockhart put his arms around his shoulders directly. Don't ask. We meet again, Harry. Come on. You're welcome, Mr. Creevy. A two-person photo is the best deal, and the two of us will sign it for you. Harry was pinned by Lockhart's shoulders and couldn't move, but his face was flushed as if he had a fever. But Lockhart couldn't feel Harry's embarrassment and waved to Colin confidently. Eisen noticed that the source of the trouble, Malfoy, had quietly withdrawn from the crowd. Tut-tut. This guy really has the essence of flick off the clothes after the matter and hide the merit and fame. Colin raised the camera in his hand in bewilderment and pressed the shutter. Then, the class bell rang. Okay, Hermione, I'm sure you'll be fine with Professor Lockhart taking care of it. Hurry up and go to class. Eisen reached out and patted Hermione on the head. Professor Eisen, see you tonight? Hermione blushed and said to Eisen, then turned and ran away. Oh, see you in the evening. After a moment of stunned, Eisen realized that she was talking about the astronomy class in the evening and immediately replied, Come on, get to class. Lockhart yelled to the crowd and then pulled Harry into a conversation. A word of advice, Harry. I put cover for you at Creevy's, and he took pictures of us two people, so that your classmates won't think you are too arrogant. Listen, it's not wise for you to be posting autographs at this stage. I know our photo in the Daily Prophet has you thinking that, but obviously, it's a bit arrogant. I mean, one day in the future, you will carry a stack of photos, but now, you are not at that time yet. Harry wanted to chime in to explain, but Lockhart didn't give him a chance to explain. Hi, Professor Eisen. Nice to meet you here. I'm going to class. Let's talk about it next time. Lockhart took the opportunity to wave to Eisen and walked towards the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom together with Harry in his arms. Amazing, amazing. After a long while, Eisen stood up and shook his head and couldn't help sighing. To be honest, if Lockhart is not without strength, then he has no shortcomings. Professor Eisen, what do you want me to do with Professor Flitwick? In the vice principal's office, Professor McGonagall looked at Eisen seriously. For Minerva, she felt that Eisen, a young astronomy professor, was a bit strange today. He suddenly dragged Professor Flitwick to his office and said that he needed help. That's how it is. Eisen looked at the other party's serious face, with a little embarrassment on his smiling face. I want to try the apparition charm, so please help me watch with Professor Flitwick. The apparition charm? If I remember correctly, you already learned the apparition charm last year, and it took a very short time to learn it. Professor Flitwick looked at Eisen suspiciously. Professor McGonagall didn't say anything, but after hearing what Flitwick said, he looked at Eisen in surprise, mixed with doubts. Ahem, it's like this. I want to try the apparition charm in Hogwarts Castle. But it's impossible, Professor Eisen. I must say that Hogwarts Castle is protected by powerful protection magic, and there are restrictions on the anti-apparition spell. No one can apparate here. Professor McGonagall resumed his serious expression and interrupted Eisen directly. Yes, that's right. So far no one has been able to apparate at Hogwarts, except house elves and Headmaster Dumbledore's pet fox. Professor Flitwick affirmed Professor McGonagall's statement. Well, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, I think so. Then, how Eisen was inspired in the library, how he came up with the idea of combining the idea of transfiguration that can summon food out of thin air with the apparition spell. Although Eisen can choose to study it in secret without telling them, he still intends to be on the safe side for this new spell involving spatial movement. After all, Eisen couldn't be sure whether there would be any surprises in the process of studying and practicing new spells on the basis of having perfectly mastered the apparition spell. If there are no accidents, Eisen has successfully developed an enhanced version of the apparition spell that can be unlimited, then it is definitely a great thing. But if something unexpected happens, and no one is watching, it will be terrible. You know, Eisen has already been able to live forever, and he hasn't enjoyed a good life yet. So how can he be so rash? Therefore, after thinking for a long time, Eisen decided to ask Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick for help. Moreover, based on Eisen's understanding of the imaginary new spell, even if it is successfully developed, it must also have a deep knowledge of both transfiguration and apparition spells before it can be successfully cast. As for whether Professor McGonagall and Flitwick can successfully cast it, Eisen is not sure, but even if they can cast it, Eisen doesn't care too much. After all, they are not villains, so there is no need to be wary too much. Oh, Merlin's beard. After Eisen finished his thoughts, Professor Flitwick couldn't help but exclaimed, "If this new spell is developed and published, you will definitely be able to get the Order of Merlin 3rd class. Oh no, it might be a 2nd class medal, but such spells must not be published." Professor McGonagall suppressed the shock on his face, and then seriously refuted Professor Flitwick's words. "Of course I won't announce it. You know, this is Hogwarts. It would be terrible if bad people come in," Eisen said with a straight face. As for the Merlin medal, he didn't care at all. After hearing Eisen's swearing assurance, Professor McGonagall's face softened, but then he was attracted by the idea Eisen just put forward. "This spell is going to be very powerful. I have to tell Dumbledore." Professor McGonagall murmured then, looking at Eisen. "Oh, is Dumbledore getting involved too?" It wasn't a big deal, and besides, if Dumbledore got involved, the development speed of new spells should be greatly increased. After the thought turned in his mind, Eisen nodded to Professor McGonagall, indicating that there is no problem. Professor McGonagall turned and left the office. "Professor Eisen, how did you come up with the idea of researching a new spell that can apparate at Hogwarts?" After Professor McGonagall left, Professor Flitwick immediately showed curiosity. About this, Eisen actually found a very good excuse. You know, when school started, 2 little wizards didn't take the Hogwarts Express, but came here by flying car. Haha, I know that. It's Harry and Ron from Gryffindor. They are very courageous and adventurous. Professor Flitwick laughed and said he knew it. I go. Is it a matter of courage and adventurousness? Such a dangerous thing. Why is the focus so strange? Well, that's right. I happened to arrive at the Whomping Willow to protect them from too much damage. Eisen shrugged his shoulders, made a gesture of agreement with him, and then explained. But if they could get there, wouldn't Harry and Ron be in danger? The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years. Yegwa Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa here. So, I thought about being able to develop a new spell with no restrictions. In this way, if you encounter a similar situation, you can easily rush to the scene to deal with the incident. That's right, it's a great idea. After listening to Eisen's explanation, Professor Flitwick immediately showed an expression of admiration. Chapter 7 Temporary Research Groups. In 10 minutes, Professor McGonagall returned. Not surprisingly, Dumbledore followed. Professor Dumbledore, hello? Looking at Dumbledore, whose white beard had drooped to his chest, Eisen didn't dare to be slighted, and hurriedly greeted him. Professor Eisen, hello? Professor Flitwick, hello? Dumbledore nodded upon seeing this, and greeted the two respectively. Then he blinked mischievously. Okay, Professor McGonagall said there was something urgent for me to come over. So, can anyone tell me what it is? Several people looked at each other, and finally Eisen spoke up. I have an idea that can combine certain theories of transfiguration with apparition. When Eisen explained the ins and outs of the future, Dumbledore's expression became serious. It's an amazing idea, I have to say, but it can't be published. Like Professor McGonagall, Dumbledore's first thought was the safety of Hogwarts. Obviously, he was also afraid that the bad guys like Dark Wizards or Death Eaters could break into Hogwarts after learning it, which was really too dangerous for students. Yes, Professor McGonagall said the same, so I will definitely not reveal it, so that those Dark Wizards have the opportunity to learn it. Eisen spread his hands to reaffirm his point, and then looked at several people. I think several professors think so too, don't they? Well, I know what you're thinking, Professor Eisen. Dumbledore nodded in relief when he heard Eisen's thoughts, but then asked a question. But, I have to say, if you follow your idea create this spell, it will be very complicated and difficult. It will take time and energy to make it possible to succeed. But the professors have their own business, can't be in the lunch break dash. Oh, well, I see what Professor Dumbledore means. How about we put the time after dinner? I mean, just me, Professor Dumbledore, you, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, for people. After dinner, how about going to the charms classroom to study together? Eisen expressed his thoughts. After all, he seems to be the only one who has more leisure among the few, and he just takes an astronomy class on Wednesday night. Although Dumbledore does not need to teach, it can basically be inferred that he is not only responsible for coordinating the affairs of Hogwarts, but also taking care of the affairs of the Wisengamot, and even investigating and searching for everything about Voldemort. Therefore, Dumbledore's schedule should be tight. As for Professors McGonagall and Flitwick, more time must be spent teaching students. So, Eisen just thought about it for a while and set the time after dinner. As for why Eisen specifically explained just a few of them, the purpose is actually quite obvious. If Dumbledore had pulled Snape in on a whim, it would have been tantamount to revealing to Voldemort. Even though Eisen knew that Snape was actually Dumbledore's spy, there was no guarantee that he would not send this information as a vote of honor in order to gain Voldemort's trust. Therefore, Eisen made a point of saying that. Next, several professors did not object. Thus, a temporary magic research group was established. Now that the matter has been settled, Eisen is leaving. After coming out of Professor McGonagall's office, Eisen thought that he would not encounter any strange things. But what he didn't expect was that when he passed by the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, a figure escaped from the classroom in a panic, hurriedly closed the door. I saw that this person was wearing a water-green robe, and it was Lockhart, the professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. However, unlike the Lockhart who Eisen saw before, who always acted calm, not only his hair was messed up, but even his clean robes were scratched, as if he was caught by something, generally torn apart. Are those little wizards so arrogant? The professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts has been beaten out? Professor Lockhart, you are, Eisen, who was full of doubts in his heart, couldn't help but stepped forward to say hello. Ahem. It's okay. I'm assigning some practical lessons to the little wizards, and they have to complete them alone, and I won't help them. Seeing Professor Eisen come to greet him, Lockhart immediately pretended that nothing happened. While pointing to the magic defense classroom while talking, at the same time, he stroked the wavy blonde hair with his hand. After hearing Lockhart's explanation, Eisen immediately thought of the picture deep in his memory, and immediately knew what happened inside. Looking at Lockhart with an expression of, as the saying goes, as long as I don't feel embarrassed, then someone else is embarrassed, Eisen couldn't help being speechless. If it weren't for the screams of students in the classroom from time to time, Eisen would have believed Lockhart's words. Everyone freezes. After a crisp voice came out through the door and window, the screaming in the classroom disappeared immediately. Eisen knew right away that Hermione must have solved the trouble with the freezing charm. I have to say that from this class alone, we can see how weak Lockhart is. If Eisen remembers correctly, when dealing with these basically harmless Cornish elves, Lockhart actually took out his wand and planned to shoot, but the spell failed, and the elves snatched the wand away up. But Hermione, a little wizard who just entered the 2nd grade, directly fixed all the elves. Just thinking about the contrast makes Eisen feel weird. Logically speaking, the magic power in Hermione's body, no matter how much or how strong it is definitely not as good as Lockhart's. But the performance of the two is so different. To be honest, Eisen really can't imagine that Lockhart is actually a graduate of Lawan Kelluo, the book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years. Yegwa reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa here. Okay, I still have something to attend to. Goodbye, Professor Eisen. Seeing that the students were about to come out, Lockhart was not interested in chatting with Eisen anymore. So, after saying hello, Lockhart left in a hurry. After the last class of the afternoon, Eisen met the trio in the auditorium. It's just that the two members of the trio at this time are like eggplants beaten by frost, sluggish, without the slightest bit of energy. Why is it like this? Is something wrong? Eisen stepped forward and asked, Professor, I don't think you will believe it. Professor Lockhart's defense against the dark arts class is to know what color he likes, what day is his birthday, what is his most wanted birthday gift, etc. I must be crazy. Feeling the pain in his heart, Harry was almost depressed. He also released a cage of Cornish elves to mess up the classroom, but he escaped. Ron curled his lips in disdain and directly dealt critical damage. But that's Professor Lockhart giving us a chance to practice. Hermione pursed her lips and retorted in a low voice, and then sneaked a glance at Eisen. Come on, he didn't know what he was doing at all. Didn't you see that Neville was hung up by the elf, but he ran away? Ron said as he patted Harry next to him, and Harry agreed go along with it. Nonsense. Hermione's voice rose. You've all read his books. Think about the amazing things he did. Who knows, it's just that he said he did. Ron muttered, clearly disagreeing with Hermione. Professor Eisen, you've read those books too. What do you think? Hermione turned to look at Eisen, eyes blinking, as if expecting Eisen's answer. Well, judging from the experiences described in the book, those things are undoubtedly true. Hearing what Eisen said, Hermione immediately smiled, but what he continued to say disappointed Hermione. However, whether that is the experience of Professor Lockhart, I think you will find out in the next study. Harry and Ron laughed silently, shaking from head to toe. Hermione turned her head away arrogantly, as if she didn't want to talk to Eisen anymore. Chapter 8: The Marauder's Map. After dinner, Eisen came to the Charms classroom to discuss the enhanced version of Apparition with Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick. Since it is Wednesday and there is an astronomy class in the evening, The discussion this time is not in-depth, but simply confirms the theory and general direction of the next research. But I have to say that just at the beginning, Eisen encountered a big problem. That is, transfiguration is used on food. Although it can be summoned from one place to another out of thin air, if it is used on people, it seems to involve part of the human body deformation. Of course, it is not directly and roughly transforming the human body, but can effectively act on the deformed part of the human body. Only by applying this part to the human body, combined with apparition, can Eisen achieve his goal. But unfortunately, due to the resistance to animagus, Eisen has never had an in-depth understanding of human body deformation. So next, at the suggestion of Professors Dumbledore and McGonagall, if Eisen wants to develop an enhanced version of apparition, even if he doesn't learn from animagus, he has to do in-depth research on human body deformation. Therefore, this temporary magic research team has another task, which is to teach Eisen some more in-depth know-how and mysteries of human body deformation. In the evening astronomy class, Eisen didn't talk too deeply, because he knows what a little wizard is. So in the process of explaining the orbit of the planets, he slightly mentioned the knowledge he learned in the previous school year. However, perhaps because he is used to Eisen's lecture style, the little wizard took a lot of seriousness in the process of learning. So, it made Eisen a lot easier. Early the next morning, after practicing spells and transfiguration as usual, Eisen began to think about the content of human body deformation. An hour and a half later, when Eisen was about to suspend his studies and go to the auditorium for breakfast, he was approached by Fred and George. "Fred, George, what do you want?" Eisen was a little amused when he saw the two people entering and closing the door quickly, with a sneaky look. "Yes, Professor Eisen, we have brought a very interesting thing. It's like the professor's mirror." Wes came to the twin brothers, looked at each other, and then looked at Eisen and said one after the other. But no matter how you looked at them, they all looked sneaky, as if they were afraid of being found out. Then, Fred took out a piece of parchment from his pocket and showed it to Eisen. For this Marauder's map, Eisen has been famous for a long time. However, when the two mentioned their scope, Eisen knew they were thinking about it. "I solemnly swear that I have no good intentions." Fred took out his wand, pointed at the parchment, and solemnly read a secret phrase, and then the blank parchment changed rapidly. In an instant, a detailed topographic map of the entire Hogwarts surfaced on the entire parchment, transforming it into a map. Of course, this is not the key point. The key point is that the names of all the people in Hogwarts can be displayed on this map. Moreover, just like the map's name Marauder's map, the names of people displayed on it are constantly moving. Obviously, the constant movement of a person's name means that someone is also constantly moving. Observing the Marauder's map at close range, Eisen found that although some places were not as good as his own observation mirror, some places were a little stronger than his own observation mirror. That is being able to reveal someone's real name. For example, although Eisen's observation mirror can see all the people and things in Hogwarts more clearly, it can't tell the real from the fake. Like Ron's pet mouse Scabbers. If he hadn't known the truth early on, even if Eisen saw it in the observation mirror, he wouldn't be able to find its abnormality. But the Marauder's map can directly display Pettigrew Peter's name. It's like using identification directly, which is better than Eisen's observation mirror. Of course, none of this mattered to Eisen. After all, he already knew the truth of some things. In fact, what made Eisen even more curious was how the brothers Fred and George discovered the spell to open the Marauder's map. Eisen knew that they had secretly obtained the Marauder's map from Filch's office. However, the spell that opened the Marauder's map is absolutely insane. How did they know? Did it come out of an attempt? But that's going too far. You know, before the Marauder's map is opened, it is just a blank parchment. After getting this thing, who would have thought that it would be opened with the sentence, "I solemnly swear that I have no good intentions"? It's like giving you a treasure chest and asking you to guess the password to open it. Can you know whether its password is a string of numbers, a poem, an idiom, or a curse word? Therefore, Eisen felt that although the possibility of them guessing the spell was possible, it was not high. Most likely, the two brothers found a few words about the Marauder's map during their research at Hogwarts. However, it was precisely because of the Marauder's map that Fred and George could come and go freely during the night tour without being noticed by Filch. It has to be said that the talent of the two of them really lies in other places. "A very nice Marauder's map. Was this made by you?" Eisen looked at the Marauder's map, and sure enough, he saw his own name standing motionless with Fred and George. Of course, he couldn't act like he knew everything, so he asked, "Oh no, we found this in Filch's office." Fred and George shook their heads and told the truth about the origin of the Marauder's map. Even Dumbledore can see it in the headmaster's office. Eisen nodded, sighing. "Yes, he often paces the office." George shrugged. "The prank is over." Fred pointed at the Marauder's map with his wand, and then he and George looked at him expectantly. "So, you came to me because you want to use it to exchange the method of making the observation mirror with me?" Seeing the expressions of the two, Eisen remembered the actions of Fred and George on the train before, and could almost predict the two. Why do people come to find themselves? Observation mirror? The two looked at each other, then looked at Eisen suspiciously. That's it. Eisen looked at the two with a half-smile and took out the sight glass from the storage ring. Immediately, Fred and George's eyes lit up, and while nodding, they also showed a little embarrassed look. However, I can't teach you how to make it. Eisen flipped his hand and put away the observation mirror, and then said seriously, if I teach you, then if you use it to spy on girls' dormitories, or what about the toilet? After hearing the first half of Eisen's sentence, Fred and George couldn't help showing disappointment, but after hearing the second half of it, they suddenly became dull again. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. The two stared blankly at Eisen, and then their expressions gradually became strange. What are you thinking? After seeing the expressions of the two, Eisen suddenly had an ominous premonition. It's nothing, yes, it's nothing, Professor Eisen. We have to leave first. The two waved their hands one after another, restrained their expressions, and pretended to leave as if they had something to do. Wait a minute. Eisen called to stop the two of them. What are you doing with your sad faces? This is for you, and you take it with you. Seeing the expressions of the two turning around, Eisen suddenly felt a little funny, and after scolding them, put the two poker cards together. The magic imprint in the style of infinity was printed and handed to them respectively. This is. After the two of them took the poker and looked it over and over several times, it was still Fred who asked curiously. It's a kind of protective charm, don't worry, accept it, Ron has it too. Eisen didn't explain its function in detail. Huh, that's pretty cool. Thank you, Professor Eisen, goodbye. The two finally smiled, then waved to Eisen happily and left. Chapter 9 The Conflict on the Quidditch Field. Eisen proceeded step by step with the plan he had made a long time ago, and from time to time he would pay attention to the trio from the god's perspective of observing characteristics, but he didn't expect the trio to encounter trouble the next day. Early Saturday morning, Harry was woken up by Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Harry, who originally planned to sleep for a few more hours, could only follow Wood out of the dormitory in a daze. Yes, Wood has been bitter about the fact that the Gryffindor Quidditch team didn't win the Quidditch trophy last year. Because in his opinion, the strength of the Gryffindor Quidditch team has always been higher than that of other academy teams. But unfortunately, Gryffindor suffered the biggest fiasco in 300 years because Harry was lying in the hospital and missed the final match. So, as captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, Wood spent the summer devising new training regimens at home. No, he dragged Harry out of bed early on Saturday morning, wanting to practice the new training plan. Harry also knew the reason for the failure of the Quidditch team last year, so he didn't blame Wood for waking him up so early under the guilt. Afterwards, Harry wrote a note to Ron and followed Wood to the locker room. When Harry came to the locker room, he realized that not only was he yawning, but Fred and George also looked like they had dark circles under their eyes and hadn't slept well. But that's not the worst thing about today. The sun was already high when they arrived at the Quidditch pitch because Wood was going to explain the new training plan that had been developed over the summer vacation. Even Ron and Hermione were in the stands. Of course, this is not the key point. The key point is that because Wood spent too much time explaining the new training plan, when they arrived at the Quidditch pitch, they found that Slytherin had also come to the pitch. This immediately made Wood very angry. After all, Gryffindor has already booked today's stadium. Therefore, when Eisen found out that Slytherin had also come to the Quidditch pitch, combined with the memories deep in his mind, he knew that this conflict was inevitable. Since Eisen has integrated the perfect level of observation features, it will basically automatically turn off the god's perspective when focusing on something or sleeping and resting. For the rest of the time, Eisen will consciously turn on the god's perspective to exercise his observation ability. In the beginning, although it was very convenient to change the angle of view, it was different from the normal angle of view that I had been used to for 2 lifetimes, so it was unavoidably awkward to drive the 360-degree angle of view without dead angles for a long time. But after a period of exercise, he has fully adapted. So, when Eisen came to the Quidditch pitch, he saw Hermione and Ron break into the center of the field from God's perspective. Immediately afterwards, Malfoy was seen sarcastically saying something, and the entire Gryffindor Quidditch team exploded. Ron even drew out his wand and pointed at Malfoy. Boom! A loud explosion sounded on the Quidditch field, and Ron's spell was reflected back on himself due to the damaged wand. After Ron staggered 2 steps, he fell directly to the ground. Ron, how are you? Harry cried out in surprise, and Ron wanted to answer, but he hiccuped when he opened his mouth, spitting out several slugs. Suddenly, Slytherin let out bursts of laughter. What's going on? Eisen came to the crowd and squatted down to check on Ron's condition, then stood up, looked around and yelled. Professor Eisen Malfoy, he dared to do that. He called her Mudblood. A girl looked at Eisen shaking with anger, and then stared at Malfoy bitterly. Eisen knew her, Gryffindor Quidditch suitor, 4th-year Arya Spinnet. Isn't this Malfoy really crazy? Eisen wondered if there was something wrong with Malfoy's head. And he actually said such a vicious and discriminatory name in public. Even though he already said a lot of private things in astronomy class, why is Malfoy still such a virtue? Could it be that his villain aura is so powerful that he was forcibly demoted when he met the Savior Trio? Hermione, remember? I once said that you were a very good wizard. You see, in the classroom, there is no spell that you can't learn. So some people say something because they are jealous of you. There's no need to take it to heart. Eisen came to Hermione's side and comforted her in a soft voice. Being comforted by Eisen, Hermione felt like eating honey. After nodding emphatically, a smile appeared on Hermione's face. Well, you and Harry send Ron to Hagrid first. I still have some things to deal with. Seeing that Hermione's mood improved, Eisen immediately nodded to Hermione and made arrangements. After Hermione and Harry helped Ron move towards Hagrid's hut, Eisen walked towards Malfoy. Step by step, it seemed that there was great pressure, and the Slytherins subconsciously restrained their smiles. AI, Professor Eisen. Malfoy tightened the light wheel 2001 in his hand. Seeing Eisen's gloomy face, he couldn't help swallowing. Oh, they all changed to Nimbus 2001. Is this the arrogance of rich people? Can you wantonly bully your classmates? Seeing Slytherin holding Nimbus 2001, Eisen raised his eyebrows, and his voice was a little harsh. I'm just a professor of astronomy, and of course I don't bother to care about you Slytherins. When they heard Eisen say this, Malfoy and the other Slytherins were relieved. But then Eisen continued the words that made them flinch. But for this matter, I think it is necessary to tell Professor Snape. After finishing speaking, a playing card appeared in Eisen's hand, and instantly changed into a hummingbird and flew towards the castle. A few minutes later, Snape appeared on the Quidditch pitch sullenly. Professor Eisen, I specifically approved Slytherin to train on the Quidditch pitch. I don't think you need to remind me, and let me handle this. Seeing Gryffindor and Slytherin stand side by side, Eisen stared looking at the Slytherins. Snape's tone was rather unpleasant. That's right. Eisen has developed a simple function with transfiguration that can be used to deliver messages. It's like delivering a message with a Patronus charm. But Eisen thought the Patronus was too conspicuous, so he developed a similar function using polymorph. Professor Snape, as the Dean of Slytherin, specially approved them to train on the Quidditch pitch. Of course there is no problem. Eisen nodded, but a playful smile appeared on his face. But I think Professor Snape should not approve Malfoy yell mudblood at people. At that moment, Eisen noticed Snape's cheek twitch. Obviously, those words hit Snape straight to the heart. Back then, it was because he called Lily a mudblood that broke up their friendship. Even Snape is still confessing to this day, but he didn't expect to hear this word again. You idiot, do you want me to inform your father to take you home, Malfoy? Snape reprimanded Malfoy angrily. 20 points deducted from Slytherin. Come to my office at night for detention. Professor Eisen, what do you think of my solution? After reprimanding Malfoy, Snape looked at Eisen. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. Professor Snape is very fair in handling this matter. I'm sure I don't have any objection. Eisen stretched out his hands to applaud, but saw his face turned even worse. In fact, from Eisen's point of view, if he wasn't here today, even if Snape knew about Malfoy, he would probably lightly expose it without any punishment at all. How to say? Although Eisen knew he was Dumbledore's man, his personality was definitely not likable. Humph. Snape didn't say anything, turned and left after snorting coldly. Chapter 10. The Reveries of Hagrid's Pumpkins. After Snape left, Eisen turned his attention to Hagrid's hut. After the perspective changed, Eisen saw several figures. Harry and Hermione were drinking tea made by Hagrid, and Ron was throwing up in a brass basin. Afterwards, Eisen walked towards Hagrid's hut. I saw Lockhart coming to you just now. What is he doing here? Hagrid. Eisen heard Harry's question as soon as he pushed away from Hagrid's cabin. Professor Eisen, except for the weak Ron, everyone in the room greeted Eisen. Lockhart has something to do with Hagrid? Eisen pulled up a chair and sat down, then followed Harry's words and asked, Heh, he wants to teach me how to prevent water monsters from getting into the well. Hagrid laid out the teapot and placed it in front of Eisen, his beard twitching angrily. As if I didn't know. He was bragging. How did you expel the female ghost? If one sentence is true, I will eat the teapot. Harry and Hermione looked at Hagrid in surprise. Even Ron, who was weak and vomiting, had the same expression. After all, in their view, it was impossible for Hagrid to criticize Hogwarts professors without any scruples. But Professor Dumbledore obviously thinks that Lockhart is the most suitable candidate for the defense against the dark arts class. Seeing Hagrid say so badly about Lockhart, Hermione couldn't sit still. Although she doesn't become Lockhart's little fan, it doesn't prevent her from thinking that Lockhart is a professor with real skills. No, it's just the only candidate. Hagrid curled his lips, brought up a plate of fudge and put it in front of several people, showing disdain. I mean, it's very important to find a defense against the dark arts professor right now. Difficult? Many adult wizards don't really want to do this. They feel that this position is a bit unlucky, and they won't last long. By the way, what's Malfoy thinking? Hagrid couldn't help but scratched his head and asked as he watched Ron spit out 2 more slugs and looked pale and miserable. Malfoy scolded Hermione a very vicious word. He called Hermione mudblood. Ron said palely, and then buried his head in the copper basin. Ouch. Fortunately, Professor Eisen was there at the time. By the way, what happened to Malfoy then? Harry said afterward. Eisen looked at Hermione with a slight smile, and seeing that she also looked over, he gave her an encouraging look. Afterwards, Eisen looked at Hagrid, who was surprised and angry again, and then said, I wanted to directly deduct 100 points from Slytherin, but you have to know that I don't like Slytherin very much, and I don't bother to talk to them, so I just called Professor Snape over and told him take care of those students. Then, when Snape found out what Malfoy had done, he not only reprimanded him, but also deducted 20 points from him, and fined him to spend the night in detention. There was a gleam of joy in all 3 faces when they heard that Malfoy had been punished by Snape. Obviously for them, this is good news. Well, that's what Professor Eisen should do. Let Snape take care of his students. I want to see if Lucius will come to the school to trouble Snape. Hagrid's eyes flashed, and then he looked at Ron. It's a good thing you didn't cast a spell on Malfoy, otherwise, you would really be in trouble. Hearing what Hagrid said, Eisen could understand. After all, Malfoy's father is the principal of Hogwarts, and the family has relatively rich financial resources. If he wants to trouble Ron, it's hard to say what will happen to Ron. By the way, Harry, I heard from Lockhart that you were going to send out a signed photo. Why didn't I get it? Hagrid suddenly thought of something, and smiled as he looked at Harry, whose mouth was stuffed with fudge. Have to. Lockhart spilled the news fast enough that even Hagrid knew about it. However, Eisen could tell that Hagrid was clearly teasing Harry. I didn't post a signed photo. Harry retorted vehemently. It's all Lockhart spreading rumors. Haha, I know, I was just joking with you. Hagrid smiled and stepped forward to pat Harry on the shoulder. Although he thought he didn't use much force, his physique was there. So Harry was slapped directly on the table. I knew you wouldn't do that, and I told Lockhart that you don't need to issue autographs to be more famous than him. Hagrid smiled mischievously and pulled Harry up hard. Hearing what Hagrid said, Eisen nodded. That's right, Harry and Lockhart. The reputation of the two in the wizarding world is definitely incomparable. After all, Harry was the savior, and his fame must have rivaled Dumbledore's. As for Lockhart, it's just a little fame. Then Lockhart must have had an ugly face after hearing that. Harry sat up straight and rubbed his chin. Yeah, not very happy. Hagrid grinned. I also told him that I never read his book, and he decided to leave. Come and see what I grow. You will be amazed. After Harry and Hermione finished drinking tea, Hagrid suddenly seemed to think of something, showing a mysterious expression, and winked at Eisen. When he came to the vegetable field behind Hagrid's hut, Eisen saw a dozen or so pumpkins that were particularly conspicuous. The reason why it is conspicuous is because they are too large. How is it? They look pretty good. Hagrid pointed to the pumpkins that were half a person tall, and said happily, These are all needed for the Halloween banquet, and they will grow a little bigger by then. What did you fertilize them with? Harry stared in surprise. Eisen came to a pumpkin and stroked it with his hand. I once again lamented the inconceivable magic in my heart. Although Eisen has long believed that the technology of the Muggle world will grow explosively in the future, and even some technological means can do things that magic cannot. But I have to say that some magic is indeed too magical and too idealistic. Like the starvation problem faced by many countries in the Muggle world, this is not a problem at all for magic. Because it is true that food cannot be changed out of thin air, but the original food can be multiplied by the copy spell. In addition, like Hagrid, you can directly apply expansion magic to the planted food to make the food grow bigger. It stands to reason that this can easily solve the food crisis. It is even said that if any wizard or Eisen himself opens a food or food-related company in the Muggle world, he will probably become the richest man in the world sooner or later. This is really scary enough. If the wizarding world can cooperate with the Muggle world, I'm afraid this world will explode with unimaginable vitality. Suddenly, this idea flashed through Eisen's mind, which made him a little shocked and inexplicable. But after thinking about it, Eisen felt that this kind of thing is currently impossible to happen. Perhaps, one day in the future this possibility will arise. In that instant, Eisen had a new perspective on magic. He found that the more he explored on the path of magic, the more he would discover the charm of magic. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, changed sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. Perhaps for wizards who grew up in wizarding families, magic may be a common ability. Most of them will only learn how to master their own magic power at Hogwarts or other schools, and learn those inherited magic powers. Curse, but never go deeper and broader to study the use of magic. Not so for Eisen. After all, he has lived in the world of ordinary people for decades, and his 3 views and thinking are different from those of wizards. Therefore, Some magical ideas will always bring him some inspiration. It can make him look at magic from another angle. Eisen feels that, in addition to Goldfinger, this kind of thinking may also be an advantage. Chapter 11 Little Actions in the Greenhouse. Is it the inflation curse? Hermione's voice came, bringing Eisen back to his senses. Turning to look, only to find Hermione looked at those giant pumpkins with a surprised expression. Hagrid, you did a great job. Okay, Hagrid. I have something to do and I'm leaving first. Although Ron would hiccup and spit out a little snot from time to time, the trio was obviously no longer affected by the previous conflict. Therefore, Eisen directly waved to Hagrid, signaled to Hermione and the others, then turned and left. It was time for lunch soon, and because Harry was sent to the Quidditch pitch by Wadella early in the morning, he didn't have time to eat breakfast at all. So, very hungry Harry and Ron and Hermione said goodbye to Hagrid and walked to Hogwarts Castle together. Not to mention the trio, after Eisen separated from them, he didn't go back, but instead took the time to come to the greenhouse. Of course, he didn't come to study herbal medicine, but to find something to do with Professor Pomona Sprout, a professor of herbal medicine. Professor Sprout, hello? From God's perspective, Eisen observed the entire greenhouse and easily found Pomona Sprout in a corner. This is a short and thick witch with a patched hat on her head. Due to her long-term work with herbs, her clothes will always be stained with some dirt. How should I put it? This is probably the most detail-oriented Hogwarts Professor Eisen has ever seen. Oh, it's you, Professor Eisen. Sprout looked up and smiled when he saw it was Eisen. Although Eisen spent a year of low-key at school, she still knew the young astronomy professor. What's the matter? Sprout looked at Eisen in surprise, not understanding what he wanted from him. Can I try to repot the Mandela? Eisen was slightly embarrassed, but he still expressed his purpose. In other words, Eisen did not do this on a whim, but something that was premeditated. Last year's final dinner, after Eisen got the magically transformed tape recorder from the Weasley twins, he also took the time to study it. As the new school year approached, Eisen took the time to do some research and made one. Of course, it wasn't like what the Weasley twins did, mainly for pranks, and it took a blow from the hammer to stop it from barking. What Eisen did was simply a magic transformation, turning it into a magic item without changing other functions. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, change sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa to Android and Apple are all available. This time, Eisen came to Sprout mainly to record the screams of Mandela with a tape recorder. In this way, a magic item is made. Eisen was pretty sure that if the magic tape recorder had recorded the Mandela scream, then Goldfinger should be able to reproduce its characteristic scream-to-death quality. Of course, since the lethal scream of Mandela grass is indistinguishable from friend and foe, Eisen decided to give up recording the screams of mature Mandela grass after careful consideration, but to record the screams of young Mandela grass seedlings. In this way, if Eisen reproduces its screaming characteristic, when used against the enemy, it will only cause the opponent to be unconscious, rather than directly killing the enemy. Some people may say, isn't this a means of weakening oneself? But looking at it from another angle, knocking out enemies and killing them makes little difference to Eisen. If Eisen really wants to kill the enemy, then just add an attack spell after the enemy is unconscious. If you want to extract information from the enemy, then keeping the opponent alive is the best choice. Moreover, the most important point is that if there are teammates around at that time, then the indiscriminate attack will not even kill the teammates if they are stunned. Therefore, Eisen feels that after engraving the screams of Mandela seedlings, there will be more options and flexibility when dealing with enemies. However, when the students were in class, they had already repotted the Mandela. After hearing Eisen's request, Sprout was a little strange, but he still explained aloud. This matter is very important to me. Please, Professor Sprout. Hearing this, Eisen got a headache, and it was indeed his problem. But for his own plan, Eisen still put on a particularly sincere expression. Well, I don't know why you would do this, but since you are a Hogwarts professor, I thought I could make an exception and let you try. After a little hesitation, Sprout finally agreed to Eisen's request. Then, under Eisen's gaze, Sprout moved a pot of Mandela to the table next to Eisen, and at the same time placed an empty pot in front of him. Later, Sprout explained to Eisen the precautions for repotting Mandela. After doing this, she put on a pair of thick pink fluffy earmuffs, and at the same time handed Eisen a pair of black earmuffs, indicating that Eisen can start. After first using the silent and wand casting technique to add a closed earplug to listen, Eisen put the earmuffs on his ears. In this way, Eisen could not hear the sound at all. Immediately afterwards, under Sprout's strange gaze, Eisen took out the magic tape recorder prepared in advance and placed it next to the Mandela grass. At the moment when the record button was pressed, Eisen grabbed the Mandela grass and pulled it out. Immediately, the Mandela grass screamed loudly like a disturbed child. Of course, Eisen didn't hear its screams. Before he had time to think about other things, Eisen immediately put the mandala into another pot and turned off the recording button of the recorder by the way. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sprout. If you need any help, You can let me know at any time. After finishing everything, Eisen put away the magic tape recorder that recorded the Mandela scream. Then he took off the earmuffs, unplugged the earplugs and listened, thanking the other party. Well, it's nothing, but I still want to say, if there is no important thing in the future, don't bother with those precious herbs. Sprout didn't know what the tape recorder Eisen was holding, so he didn't stop at his little tricks. Of course, maybe this kind of practice did affect the Mandela a bit, so she gave Eisen a little warning. Okay, I see. I have to leave beforehand, Professor Sprout. Nodding slightly embarrassed, Eisen waved his hand and quickly fled away. After lunch, Eisen came to the library. After Dumbledore and McGonagall's suggestions, Eisen has gained a little in human body deformation, but it is still a little short of developing a new spell with apparition. But Eisen knew that this kind of thing should not be rushed. Therefore, I usually follow my own rhythm, practice magic spells when it is time to practice spells, study alchemy when it is time to study alchemy, and study when it is time to learn about human body deformation. So it was a very fulfilling life. When Eisen came to the auditorium to have dinner, he ran into the trio of saviors again. To his surprise, Hermione was holding a book, as usual, seemingly completely unaffected by Malfoy's words. But looking back at Harry and Ron, they were uncharacteristically frowning. Their appearance made Eisen very curious. Did they cause any trouble again? Chapter 12: The Unlucky Harry and Ron. Harry, Ron, what's the matter with you? Getting up and sitting down next to Hermione, Eisen looked at the two of them with a proper expression of doubt. Professor McGonagall asked me to help Filch polish the silverware and trophies in the trophy room at night. Ron said weakly, also, you can't use magic, you can only wipe it with your hands. Eisen suppressed a laugh, then looked at Harry. Professor McGonagall told me that Professor Lockhart called me to help answer letters from his admirers. Harry also showed a desperate expression. I would rather go to the trophy room to wipe those prizes, but Professor McGonagall doesn't allow that. At the dinner table, those mashed potato pies were very delicious, but at this moment they couldn't whet their appetite at all. You guys are indeed violating the school rules. Hermione pursed her lips and let out a small gurgle. Please, I'm annoying enough, just stop talking, Ron said and turned his head away, not wanting to pay any more attention to her. Then you are busy. Eisen cut a piece of steak and stuffed it into his mouth, and then continued, you know, there are more than 100 trophies in the trophy room. Yeah, Filch really killed me. I'm not as good at scrubbing as muggles are. Hearing Eisen's words, Ron nodded sadly. I'd rather trade it with you, Harry said listlessly. I did a lot of scrubbing at the Dursleys, but answering letters from Lockhart admirers must be a nightmare. It's nothing. It's just to exercise your hands-on ability, Eisen said while eating, with a smile on his face. Hearing Eisen's words, Harry and Ron looked at each other, not knowing what to say for a while. Hermione, have you encountered any learning difficulties recently? Eisen looked at Hermione, who was beside him. No, Professor Eisen, the second-year class is pretty easy. Hermione shook her head, showing a confident attitude. Well, Eisen can only sigh. Hermione is worthy of being a top student. Basically, she will not encounter any problems in her studies. After dinner, Eisen went to the charms classroom as usual, and continued to study the enhanced version of apparition with several professors. And Harry and Ron went into action after 8 o'clock. For Ron, scrubbing the trophy was a pain in the ass. But for Harry, writing back to Lockhart fans was even more painful. So, Harry entered Lockhart's office at 8 o'clock in the evening and wrote letters to his fans for hours. By the time he got back to the Gryffindor common room, his fingers were going numb. Worse still was Ron, who took an hour longer than Harry to scrub the trophy. I don't know if Filch was messing with him, but he had to scrub a trophy a dozen times. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, changed sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. However, Harry was puzzled by some strange noises he heard in Lockhart's office. Let me tear you apart, kill you. Harry was sure at the time that he heard the creepy voice, and he asked Lockhart, who didn't hear anything. Could it be that he was hallucinating? When he told Ron about this, Harry began to suspect that something was wrong with his hearing system. The next day, Eisen was in the library again. Eisen took out a copy of Failed Body Transformation from the bookshelf and was looking at it with relish. To be honest, Eisen even broke out in a cold sweat after seeing all kinds of human body deformation failure cases in the book. It was the first time he saw how weird and serious the failed human body transformation was. For example, there was a wizard in history who wanted to partially deform the human body after studying human body deformation. As a result, he turned himself into a half-human, half-beast, and was finally killed by a hunter. Previously, Eisen thought that he had a lot of knowledge in transfiguration, but after a deep understanding of human transfiguration, he realized how dangerous it is. After a while, Eisen closed the book and let out a long sigh of relief. For Eisen, understanding the human body's morphing was a real reminder of its dangers. But the more Eisen admired the wizards in the wizarding world. Because the wizards also created a very safe shortcut to human body transformation, That is animagus. How did animagus learn it? For the first step, keep a mandala leaf in your mouth for an entire month, from one full moon to the next. And under no circumstances should the leaves be swallowed or spit out. As soon as the leaves leave the mouth, the whole process starts all over again. After this step is completed, the second step begins. The second step is to put the leaves soaked in your own saliva into a small transparent bottle on the second full moon, and let it receive pure moonlight. If it happens to be cloudy that night, you must find another piece of mandarin leaves. Della leaf restarts from the first step. This is followed by adding one of her own hairs, 1 silver teaspoon of dew, which must be collected from a place where there has been no sunlight or human contact for 7 full days, and the chrysalis of a hawk moth to the vial that is being illuminated by the moonlight. Then, leave the mixture in a quiet and dark place, safe from prying eyes and distractions, until the next storm. While waiting for the storm, do the following every sunrise and sunset. Point the tip of your wand to your heart and say the incantation: Amador, Amo, Animadao, Animagus. If you're lucky, the storm will come soon, but if you are unlucky, you may even have to wait for several years. But during this process, the transparent bottle must remain completely undisturbed and free from sunlight. Moreover, before the storm comes, you cannot secretly check the status of the transparent bottle. When the storm comes, a blood-red potion will appear in the transparent bottle. Then the wizard should rush to a spacious and safe place, point the wand to the heart and say, Amato, Amo, Animado, Animagus, and drink the potion. If all goes well, you have successfully learned animagus. In the past, Eisen knew that animagus was difficult, but after understanding each step in detail, Eisen even had a feeling of horror. Of course, what makes Eisen feel horrible is not the strength of animagus, but that there are wizards who can create such complicated steps. More importantly, after going through such complicated steps, it actually succeeded. This made Eisen curious, how the first wizard who created animagus came up with such complicated steps. But fortunately, if Eisen wants to study and learn the enhanced version of apparition, he only needs to understand some theories and skills of human body deformation, but he doesn't have to learn animagus. Near noon, Eisen put the book back on the shelf and walked out of the library to have lunch in the auditorium. Originally, Eisen thought it was another ordinary day, but Hermione chased after him. Professor Eisen. Hermione was holding a book, staring blankly at Eisen, who was looking back at her. What's the matter, Hermione? Seeing Hermione's dazed look, Eisen waved his hand in front of her eyes. Oh, yes, I want to ask a question. Hermione blushed and quickly explained her reason for coming. Professor Eisen, do you think some wizards have some talent to hear voices that others can't hear? Could it be that you're hallucinating? Eisen was taken aback for a while, but at the same time he said something perfunctorily. He understood it in his heart. It seems that Harry heard the voice of the basilisk when he was replying to the Lockhart fans. Professor! Hermione rolled her eyes and glanced at Eisen, then moved closer to him and whispered, Well, it's Harry. Harry said this morning that he heard a strange voice that Lockhart didn't hear last night. So, you suspect that Harry has the gift of being able to hear voices that others can't hear. Eisen paused and said this conclusion thoughtfully. Yes, otherwise, could it be that Harry really had auditory hallucinations? Hermione's tone was very firm. Chapter 13 Parseltongue. That's right. The voice Harry heard should be that of the basilisk. This ability is called Snake Mouth in the wizarding world. It was originally an ability only available to Voldemort, but because his soul fragments splashed on Harry, Harry also had the ability of Snake Mouth. For the Savior Trio, most of the crises in the second school year came from the basilisk, which was released by controlling Ginny's diary. Thinking of this, Eisen couldn't help reaching out and patting his forehead. During this period of time, I have been focusing on my own affairs, but I almost forgot about the diary. What's the matter, Professor Eisen? Seeing that Eisen reached out and patted his forehead, Hermione didn't understand why he did that. Oh, nothing. Eisen smiled slightly, put his hand down and gave Hermione a suggestion. I think you can ask Harry if he has any special experiences before, and maybe you can find the answer. Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Thank you, Professor. Hermione nodded cheerfully, turned and left in a hurry. Watching Hermione's leaving figure, Eisen was lost in thought. As far as the big events of the second school year were concerned, they basically all started from Voldemort's diary. So, should we directly take this Horcrux in our hands and destroy it directly? Regarding this, Eisen hesitated. Because, if Eisen really wants to destroy the diary in advance, then it is foreseeable that the plot will have a relatively large change. This is not very kind to Eisen. If Eisen's strength really surpassed the ceiling of the wizarding world and reached the level of being unscrupulous, then he can be reckless from beginning to end at will. It's even no problem to collect all the Horcruxes in advance and destroy them. Of course, judging from the growth rate of Eisen's strength, he doesn't need to care too much about the plot. However, if you can keep a low profile, then there is no need to do some other actions, as long as the shot is at a critical moment. TSK. It seems that Ginny will have to suffer for a while. After regaining his senses, Eisen shook his head, and had no intention of saving Ginny from Voldemort immediately. Anyway, she's not in any danger right now. After leaving Eisen, Hermione found Harry and Ron in the Gryffindor common room. Special experience? Harry mused after Hermione told the two of Eisen's suggestions. He knew that the voices he heard were definitely not hallucinations, so he focused on the special experience. Hermione and Ron fell silent, calmly watching Harry's dazed look, which seemed rather funny. After a while, Harry seemed to remember something, with a look of shock on his face, then looked at the two of them, and said eagerly, "Maybe I heard the sound of a snake." "Snake? Why do you think that?" Ron swallowed, his expression a little weird. "You mean, you can hear what the snake is saying?" Hermione looked at Harry in surprise. "That's right. That was the time I visited the zoo with the Dursleys and the others before I entered Hogwarts." Harry didn't notice how weird the expressions of the two were, but recalled that he had been with a snake. The conversation thing is said. "You mean, you changed the glass and released a boa constrictor, and it told you that you've never been to Brazil?" Ron's tone dropped involuntarily. "What's so strange about this? I didn't know I was a wizard until later, and I bet there are many wizards who can do it." In Harry's view, talking to snakes should be a common talent for all wizards. After all, wizards can even cast magic, so what's so strange about talking to snakes? No, the ability to talk to snakes is called snake speak, and not many wizards have such a talent. Ron frowned, looking at Harry with a worried expression. Snake speak is the hallmark of Salazar Slytherin, so you know, the symbol of Slytherin is a snake. "It's impossible." Harry opened his mouth halfway, but suddenly paused as if thinking of something. He thought of the first-year sorting ceremony. The sorting had originally planned to sort him into Slytherin, but because of his strong request, he was sorted into Gryffindor. "So, Harry, you may be the descendant of Slytherin," Hermione concluded directly. "It's okay, Harry." Ron stepped forward and patted Harry on the shoulder, further reassuring. "Maybe your ancestor is Salazar Slytherin? You know, pure-blood wizard families often intermarry. If it is true after all, Malfoy and I are still relatives." "You and Malfoy?" Not only Harry, but even Hermione looked at Ron in astonishment. What's so strange about this? If the pure-blood wizard family didn't intermarry, it would have disappeared long ago. Seeing the shocked expressions of the two, Ron shrugged his shoulders. In fact, it does exactly what Ron said. Due to the intermarriage between pure-blood wizard families, they are basically related. Like Ron, his grandmother was from the Black family, and Malfoy's mother was also from the Black family. From this point of view, it is not wrong to say that Ron and Malfoy are related. "So, what I heard in Lockhart's room was the squawk?" Harry nodded, then brought the subject back. "But didn't you say you heard things like tearing you apart and killing you?" Ron said the key. "Indeed, how could a normal snake say such a thing? Is it possible that the snake was hunting, you know, catching bugs and rats or something?" Hermione speculated. "Then where is it hidden?" Lockhart's office was spacious at the time, but I didn't find anything strange. Harry felt that he was getting close to the truth, but there were still some questions that he couldn't figure out. Ron and Hermione looked at each other, not knowing how to explain this. Could it be that the snake knew the illusion spell, or wore an invisibility cloak? This is obviously impossible. The three of them speculated and made up their minds. Although it was reasonable, they didn't have the slightest evidence, so they had no choice but to give up in the end. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa do install the latest version. In the evening, when Eisen returned to the office from the Charms classroom, he was in a very happy mood. The reason? Naturally, it is because of a breakthrough in the study of the enhanced version of Apparition with Professors Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Professor Flitwick. Although the enhanced version of Apparition has not yet been created, this progress is enough to make Eisen happy. Eisen believes that if you look at this rate of progress, it is estimated that it will be successful soon. However, to Eisen's surprise, Hermione actually found her again. "So, you mean that Harry is a snake, and heard a snake say something like, tear you apart, kill you?" Eisen was not surprised when Hermione heard the news from Harry. Color. After all, for Eisen, he already knew all this. "I think Harry is too sensitive," Hermione said solemnly. "Maybe it's just a snake hunting. It's no big deal." Hee hee. Seeing Hermione's attitude, Eisen couldn't help laughing. The little girl was still too young to know how powerful this snake was. "Okay, I see. I will pay attention to this point. Don't worry." Speaking of basilisks, Eisen regrets that the world of Harry Potter has so many bug-level abilities, as well as magical contracts such as the Fidelity Curse and the Unbreakable Oath, but there is no such thing as a pet contract. To be honest, if he had this ability, Eisen wouldn't need to deal with the basilisk. He could just make a contract with it and turn it into his pet. In this way, not only can a problem be solved, but also a powerful pet can be added. Wouldn't it be beautiful? But unfortunately, this contract to bind magical animals does not exist. Of course, if Eisen was allowed to create a master-slave contract for magical animals, it would not be impossible. After all, the magic in this world is more idealistic, and there are ready-made magic contracts to refer to, so it must be possible to create it if you continue to study it. But right now Eisen still has his own plan and doesn't have the energy to do it, so he can only miss the basilisk in Hogwarts. Perhaps later, when Eisen is free, he will do research, but certainly not now. Chapter 14 Letters. By the way, Professor Eisen, I still have a question to ask. After hearing Eisen's answer, Hermione breathed a sigh of relief, but then she seemed to realize that there was something else to do, so she looked at Eisen and said, "Oh, is there any problem?" "It's okay, let's talk." The sudden change of subject still made Eisen look curious. "You said, do we study astronomy just for divination?" After Hermione asked this question, a look of bewilderment appeared on Hermione's face. After a year of study, especially after listening to Eisen's astronomy class in the second year, the doubt in Hermione's heart became more and more obvious. Before entering Hogwarts, Hermione was a top student. Although she didn't study astronomy specifically, she still had some understanding. But after entering Hogwarts, she discovered that although Eisen's astronomy class was interesting, the content was not complicated. It wasn't until the second year that the content of the astronomy class was slightly enriched, but it didn't have much to do with the knowledge required for the divination class. In fact, Eisen could understand Hermione's doubts. In the first grade, the content of Eisen's class most of the time was not much different from that taught by the astronomy professor at Hogwarts School. Most of them are explaining the names of the major planets and satellites, as well as their characteristics, etc. If there is any difference, it may be that Eisen's long-term thinking of ordinary people has caused him to stop more when explaining. From another angle, it will bring a sense of novelty to the little wizard. In the second year, after explaining the orbits of planets, satellites, and galaxies, Eisen may have interspersed with some more specific data, showing a wider world in front of them. Of course, in the process of explaining, it is inevitable that we will digress a little bit, and the content will be more complicated. This made a student like Hermione puzzled. The astronomy class is so complicated and huge. Is it really just for divination? Well, I understand what you mean. Facing Hermione's question, Eisen nodded and continued, "For students like you, the content of astronomy is to assist the divination class." Hermione was a little taken aback by Eisen's answer. "I know what you want to ask, but this involves students' employment choices and life plans after graduating from Hogwarts." Eisen reached out and interrupted Hermione's words and continued to speak, but the expression on his face gradually became serious. For example, some students are particularly interested in divination. After graduating from Hogwarts, they may engage in research and work in divination, or they may go directly to Hogwarts to apply for a divination professor. In this case, then he should have more in-depth research and study of astronomy and divination. In the same way, if a student has no interest in divination and does not intend to engage in related work or research, then he does not need to study astronomy and divination in depth, which will have no impact on his life plan. After all, in Hogwarts School, divination is only an elective course. Although astronomy is a compulsory course, it actually serves the divination class to a large extent. Is that so? After listening to Eisen's explanation, Hermione showed a more troubled expression. "So, will you engage in research and work in divination in the future?" Eisen shook his head and asked a question. "No, Professor Eisen, I haven't made up my mind yet." As soon as Hermione heard Eisen say that, Hermione suddenly lost her mind. After all, she really hasn't had time to think about these things yet. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa you do install the latest version. That's right, you've just become a second-year student, and you don't know much about elective courses, and you're far away from graduation, so you don't need to think about it so much. Eisen nodded, not surprised by Hermione's thoughts. "As for me, if you are interested, you can learn more about it, which is not a bad thing, but you have to remember that you are a wizard, so don't waste your talent in magic." "I see, Professor Eisen." Hermione's pretty face flushed slightly, but without any hesitation, she nodded solemnly while speaking. "Then, Professor Eisen, why did you apply for the position of Professor of Astronomy?" Just when Eisen thought that Hermione was fine, Hermione suddenly asked about him. Hearing Hermione's question, Eisen hesitated. After all, he couldn't tell Hermione that he had chosen to become a professor in order to get into Hogwarts. If he had the choice, he also wanted to study at Hogwarts School from the first grade. But unfortunately, he did not awaken Goldfinger before the age of 11 and missed the opportunity for students to enroll. As I said before, I am a Muggle-born wizard and have lived in the Muggle world for a long time. After pondering for a moment, Eisen planned to say a little bit, so at the beginning, I came to Hogwarts to apply for a job. In fact, in addition to the professor of astronomy, there is also a professor of Muggle studies. But the original professor of astronomy, Aurora Sinistra, left, so I became the professor of astronomy at Hogwarts. Of course, Eisen couldn't say that he awakened his magical power through Goldfinger at the age of 18. After all, even in the wizarding world, this kind of thing is too outrageous. Besides, as the biggest trump card of the time traveler, how could it be possible to tell others about Goldfinger? Of course, Eisen's statement is not a lie. He's a Muggle-born wizard, that's for sure. He lived in the Muggle world for a long time, at least until he was 18. Therefore, when Eisen said this to Hermione, he was very confident. So it's like this. Hermione's eyes flashed some inexplicable look. She didn't know what she thought of. Thump thump. There was a sound of knocking on the window, and Eisen turned his head to look over, and found that it was an owl with a letter in its beak. Who will send me the letter? Eisen thought suspiciously, but the movements of his hands were not slow. He took out his wand and waved his hand to open the window, allowing the owl to fly in. Okay, Hermione, it's getting late. You should go back to sleep. Taking the envelope from the owl's beak, Eisen opened it and said to Hermione, who was beside him with a curious expression, "Oh, goodbye, Professor." Perhaps knowing that Eisen was busy, Hermione politely greeted her and left. After Hermione left, Eisen turned his attention to the letter. Time passed slowly. Eisen read the letter, but the expression on his face kept changing. He smiled for a while and frowned again for a while. After Eisen read the whole letter, he sighed heavily. This letter is from Arthur Weiss. The envelope said that during this time he had already found a shop in Diagon Alley, but he hadn't rented it yet. Because some problems with the projection equipment have not been resolved, I hope that Eisen can go to the Pig's Head pub in Hogsmeade Village at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon to discuss with him face to face. Of course, the reason why Arthur wrote to explain this matter at this time. He also briefly introduced the reasons in the letter. During this period of time, the Ministry of Magic has been confiscating all kinds of dangerous goods, so Arthur has been relatively busy. But by coincidence, it happened that Ron drove his privately modified Muggle car out without authorization, and many people knew about it. This time, Arthur was not only censored by the Ministry of Magic, but also fined 50 galleons. It is precisely because of this that the matter of Eisen begging him has been delayed until now. Smiling and shaking his head, Eisen wrote Arthur back a letter, saying that he would be on time for the appointment at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Chapter 15. Associations brought through the looking glass. In a blink of an eye, the agreed time came. On Sunday afternoon, Eisen left Hogwarts early after lunch and came to Hogsmeade. Hogsmeade Village is said to have been established very early, almost at the same time as Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. At that time, a wizard named Hengise settled down near Hogwarts School in order to avoid the persecution of Muggles. Slowly, as time went by, more and more wizards came to settle here, and Hogsmeade Village was established in this way. By this time, Hogsmeade has become the only village in the whole of England that is full of wizards and no Muggles. Of course, due to its proximity to Hogwarts, the school's professors and students especially like to hang out in Hogsmeade Village, including Dumbledore and Hagrid, both regular visitors to Hogsmeade Village. Of course, for Hogwarts schools, first and second-year students are not allowed to go to Hogsmeade Village. Even if students in the 3rd grade and above are going to Hogsmeade, they need a guardian's signature before they can go on a specific Saturday. In fact, such a rule is very strange. At least Eisen does not understand why Hogwarts has such a rule for the time being. Because in Eisen's view, there is not much difference between a 2nd-year wizard and a 3rd-year wizard. But 3rd-year wizards were allowed to go to Hogsmeade. Moreover, if you are allowed to go. What is the guardian's signature permission? Are you afraid of accidents? Well, Eisen doesn't know all of this, nor is he interested in delving into it. But speaking of it, although Eisen knew Hogsmeade Village, he didn't take a good look around here. So, while there is still time, Eisen plans to take a look around this wizard village. After walking through the long street, Eisen saw the Davies Band store at the end of the main street in Hogsmeade Village, and immediately became interested and went straight in without thinking twice. After entering, I found that the various magic props sold in this store were beyond Eisen's imagination, and it was even more surprising than the Wisewreck Magic Supply store in Diagon Alley. I saw that this store sells various repair tools, as well as various magic props and equipment. There are all kinds of props for Quidditch games, such as memory balls, looking glasses, and anti-demon glasses. Looking at these dazzling magic props, Eisen had a feeling that maybe if he just walked around here, he might be able to collect dozens of magic props that can be extracted by Goldfinger with extraordinary characteristics. Thinking of this, Eisen suddenly felt tired. Do I really have to put so much effort into studying alchemy? For a moment, Eisen even doubted himself. But after thinking about it, he has refined the observation mirror, a magic item that can provide perfect observation characteristics, so it is necessary to continue to study alchemy. After all, what you learn will truly belong to you. Thinking like this, Eisen finally calmed down. Hi, do you need to buy anything? Perhaps seeing Eisen in a daze alone, the owner of the Davies Band shop stepped forward and asked, "Oh, let me take a look first." Eisen regained his composure, said to the other party, and then stepped forward to pick up a speculum to observe. Since the miracle trait has not yet been acquired, Eisen doesn't know right away what kind of traits it will provide. It's just that Eisen actually has a certain understanding of the looking glass. It is said that this thing can play an early warning role. Once suspicious people or the existence of black magic power are found, it will sound an alarm, rotate, and emit light to remind the owner. But Eisen thought it was a little too weird. The reason why it is called weird is because its function seems to be only half done. Judging from the production results of the Marauders map, the effect of range detection magic combined with manifestation magic can mark everyone within the range together with their names. Now that the looking glass can detect suspicious people around and issue an alarm, why not just mark the suspicious people directly? This made Eisen very puzzled. If Eisen makes the looking glass, it can add the location and name of suspicious characters to it while retaining its original function. In this way, the early warning function of the looking glass will be more complete. Is it because the function is too powerful, breaking the balance? After thinking for a while, this idea suddenly popped up in Eisen's mind, but it made him a little dumbfounded. This is probably to a large extent likely to be the truth. Because if the looking glass really has such a powerful function, I am afraid that the wizarding world will have a looking glass, which will lead to many bad things that must be detected early and resolved. But in this way, in what direction will the plot development go? Of course, if that kind of powerful looking glass is really popular, maybe some wizards will go to great lengths to develop spells or props that can block the looking glass. Eisen smacked his lips, not knowing what to say. However, when it comes to the function of the Marauders map that can instantly display the names of people within the detection range, even though Eisen knows it is magical, he still thinks it is too unscientific. Because this kind of function is too outrageous, it can directly know what a stranger's name is. The question is, if a person's name has ever been changed, does it show the former name or the current name? What is the basis? After all, a name is just a person's title and code name, which is acquired the day after tomorrow. So how can it be connected to a person? Is it relying on the reverse realization of the principle that as long as you know a person's name, you can curse? If this is the case, it can be explained. But thinking about it, Eisen still felt a headache, because he once again knew how outrageous the idealism of magic in this world is. At this moment, Eisen has reason to believe that many bugs in the original Harry Potter book that can completely disrupt the plot and break the balance have been deliberately eliminated by the author. As he thought before, if the function of showing people's names and places was really added to the looking glass, then maybe Peter Pettigrew would not have been able to hide in Ron's house for so many years. Recommended, Yegwa Reading and Chasing Books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa Do here, everyone can try it soon. Perhaps, even Harry's parents had been able to hide ahead of time, evacuating perfectly before Voldemort arrived. In short, these things are not impossible. But obviously, if it is really arranged like this, then the whole story cannot continue. But now that Eisen has already lived in this world and thought of this level, there is no need to turn a blind eye. Because of this discovered bug, Eisen of course hopes that the more the better. Boss, I want to buy a speculum. With an eager expression on his face, Eisen bought the speculum in his hand. Previously, one of the magic props produced by Eisen was the observation mirror. The second one was a simple modification of the tape recorder, and the third one he had decided to research into an enhanced version of the sighting mirror. However, at the moment of making up his mind, some thoughts in Eisen's heart have actually changed slightly. Previously, he had always wanted to hide himself. As a passerby professor, he didn't dare to change the plot arbitrarily, so that he could take advantage of the opportunity to act. For this reason, he didn't even interfere with Voldemort's diary Horcrux's control over Ginny. But as his strength became stronger and stronger, more and more ideas came up, and after he was able to realize the ideas, his own existence had become buggy. This kind of bug is not a bug in strength, but a bug that can achieve exceptional effects after combining various whimsical ideas. For example, the observation mirror he made earlier. If he handed the scope to Harry, then Harry would definitely not have to check out many things during the Hogwarts night tour. In this way, in the first year of school, Harry might directly find out what the truth of the matter is. If he made the envisioned enhanced version of the looking glass and gave it to Dumbledore, maybe Dumbledore would be able to find Voldemort and kill him if he walked around outside with it. Well, this one still needed to deal with Voldemort's Horcruxes, but it would definitely come in handy for Dumbledore. Even, during this period of time, he and Dumbledore have been working on an enhanced version of apparition. Eisen could basically predict that if Dumbledore could master the enhanced apparition, his strength and mobility would undergo unimaginable changes. Thinking of this, Eisen couldn't help baring his teeth, and a word popped up in his heart: that is outrageous. That's right, Eisen thought that as a passerby professor, he would not affect the development of the plot if he kept a low profile, but he didn't expect that he could already affect so much in a silent manner.